If we didn't have AI, we'd be in a panic right now about what's going to happen to the economy. We've actually been in a regime for 50 years of very slow technological change in the face of declining population growth. The timing has worked out miraculously well. We're going to have AI and robots precisely when we actually need them. The remaining human workers are going to be at a premium, not at a discount.
How big of a deal is the moment in time that we're living through right now?
This is a very, very historic time. AI is the philosopher's stone. Now we have a technology that transfers the most common thing in the world, which is sand, converted into the most rare thing in the world, which is thought.
You spent a lot of time with the most cutting-edge AI-forward founders.
The most leading-edge founders are thinking of, can you have entire companies where the founder does everything?
There's all this concern that young people, jobs are not going to be there for them, AI is replacing them.
Everybody wants to talk about job loss, but really what you want to look at is task loss. The job persists longer than the individual tasks.
What's your sense of just the future of three very specific roles? Product manager, engineer, designer.
There's like a Mexican standoff happening between those three roles. Every coder now believes they can also be a product manager and a designer because they have AI. Every product manager thinks they can be a coder and a designer, and then every designer knows they can be a product manager and a coder. They're actually all kind of correct. What happens is the additive effect of being good at two things is more than double. The additive effect of being good at three things is more than triple. You become a super relevant specialist in the combination of the domains.
People aren't fully grasping how much this is changing.
People who really want to improve themselves and develop their career should be spending every spare hour, in my view, at this point, talking to an AI, being like, all right, train me up.
Today, my guest is Marc Andreessen, one of the most seminal figures in tech and in business. He invented the web browser, built the world's largest venture firm. He's also a multi-time founder and an investor in essentially every generational tech company, and is also one of the most clear-minded, lateral, and insightful thinkers about both the past and the future of technology. In this very special conversation, we chat about how unique and significant the moment that we are all living through right now is, what skills he's teaching his kids to thrive in the AI future, what happens to product managers, designers, and engineers in the coming years, where moats exist in AI, what the most AI-native founders are doing differently, and so much more that is just scratching the surface of this very deep and important conversation. You are going to walk away from this chat being smarter about what is going on in the world right now and where things are heading. A huge thank you to my newsletter community and folks on X for suggesting topics and questions for this conversation. If you enjoy this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and follow it in your favorite podcasting app or YouTube. It helps tremendously. And if you become an insider subscriber of my newsletter, you get a year free of over 20 incredible products, including a year free of Lovable, Replit, Bold, Gamma, N8M, Linear, Superhuman, Devon, PostHog, Descript, Whisperflow, Perplexity, Warp, Granola, Magic Patterns, Raycast, ChatPRD, Mobbit, and Stripe Atlas. Head on over to lennysnewsletter.com and click Product Pass. With that, I bring you Marc Andreessen after a short word from our sponsors. Developers and what impact AI is having on engineering productivity. To learn more, visit DX's website at getdx.com/Lenny. That's getdx.com/Lenny. If you're a founder, the hardest part of starting a company isn't having the idea, it's scaling the business without getting buried in back office work. That's where Brex comes in. Brex is the intelligent finance platform for founders. With Brex, you get high-limit corporate cards, easy banking, high-yield treasury, plus a team of AI agents that handle manual finance tasks for you. They'll do all the stuff that you don't. Marc Andreessen, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the podcast.
Awesome, Lenny. Thank you. It's great to be here.
I want to start with just a big picture question. I have a billion directions I want to go, but I think this is going to give us a little bit of a frame of reference. How big of a deal is the moment in time that we're living through right now
This is a very, very historic time. I think 2025 was maybe the most interesting year in my entire career and probably life. And I think I would expect 2026 to exceed that.
Wow, that says a lot.
Yeah, I've seen some stuff. So it feels like two things are happening. One is the trust that a lot of people have had in kind of what you could describe as kind of legacy institutions around the world is, I think, in kind of full scale collapse right now. By the way, there's a lot of data to support that. And so I think there's like a lot of structures and orders and institutions that people have just relied on for a long time that have just proven to not be up for the challenge. And then kind of corresponding with that is the national and global conversation have become, like, let's say, liberated. And so, this sort of incredible revolution that we have in kind of, what I would describe as freedom of speech, freedom of thought, ability for people to openly discuss things that maybe they couldn't discuss even a few years ago, is just dramatically expanded. And I think that's now on a one-way train for just a much broader range of discourse. And then, there's also just these like incredibly massive geopolitical shifts that are happening. And obviously the US is changing a lot. Europe is changing a lot. China's changing a lot. Latin America, by the way, is changing a lot. Very dramatic, events playing out down there right now. Kind of all over the world. Like, I think a lot of assumptions are being pulled out into the daylight and re-examined. And then it's kind of the fact that all these things are happening at the same time, right? And so you've got all of these countries and industries, where things are kind of increasingly in upheaval, but you have AI as this kind of new technology that's going to really affect things. And then you've got, people, citizens being able to fully participate, being able to argue things out. And so it's kind of like those three kind of big mega things are kind of all colliding at the same time. And I think we're probably just the very beginning of all three of those. And those all feel like kind of, historical, moment shifts. Comparable in magnitude to maybe the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, maybe the end of World War II, kind of moments like that. It certainly feels like that.
Good God. What a time to be alive.
Yeah.
In terms of the AI piece, which is where a lot of people are trying to figure out what to do, what do you think isn't being priced in yet in terms of the impact AI is going to have on, say, the world or just people listening?
The AI thing, I think at this point, I think it's pretty clear with our technology hats on that this stuff is really working now, right? And so there was this kind of when there was a ChatGPT moment 3 years ago. It was only, by the way, only 3 years ago, right? Was the ChatGPT moment, and the big question was, all right, this is like incredibly fun and creative, and like we have machines now that can compose Shakespearean sonnets and rap lyrics, and this is amazing. But then there's this sort of big question, like, can you harness this technology for reasoning and for problem solving in domains that like really matter, medicine and science and law and so forth. It turns out the answer to that is yes, right? The last 12 months and especially the last 3 months have really proven that like AI can really do you're seeing it all now. You can actually AI is now developing new math theorems. Over the holiday break, there's sort of what it feels like the AI coding thing, really hit critical mass, and the world's best, the world's best programmers, right, including like Linus Torvalds, for the first time over the holiday break, basically said, yeah, AI is now coding better than we can, and so that that's incredibly powerful, and I think we all kind of I think assume that AI now is going to get really good at reasoning in any domain in which there are verifiable answers, and so that's going to include like many very important domains. So like for the technology feels like it's moving fast and it's going to be working really well. I think the thing that is not well understood, I think a lot of people have a lot of people in the industry have kind of what I would describe as this one-dimensional thing, which is, okay, as a result of the technology now working, AI just kind of sweeps the world and changes everything. And I think that's kind of the wrong framer. I think it's based on an incomplete understanding of the world that we live in, or the world that we've been living in for the last 80 years. And I would call out two things in particular. So one is, I think it's felt to us, like in the US and the West for the last, 30 years or 50 years, it's felt like we've been in a time of great technological change. But actually, if you look for actually evidence of that, like in statistical evidence of that, analytical evidence of that, like you basically can't find it. And in particular, economists have a way of measuring the rate of technological change in the economy that is productivity growth, which we could talk about what that means. But basically, it's sort of the mathematical expression of the impact of technology on the economy. And productivity growth for the last 50 years has actually been very low, not very high. So we all feel like it's been very high. There's been lots of technological change. What's actually happening is it's been very low. And in fact, the pace of productivity growth, like in the U.S., is running at like a half of what in my lifetime, in our lifetimes, it's been running at about a half the pace that it ran in between 1940 and 1970. And it's been running at about a third the pace that it ran between about 1870 to about 1940. And so statistically, in the US, in the West, technology progress in the economy, technology impact on the economy has actually slowed way down. And so the AI thing is going to hit, but it's hitting an environment in which we have actually had almost no technological progress in the actual economy for a very long time. So we could talk about that. And then there's this other just incredible thing that's happening, which is the demographic collapse, right? It's sort of a Western phenomenon and an increasingly global phenomenon, which is, the rate of reproduction of the human species is in rapid decline. And, there are many countries, including the US, where, the rate of reproduction is, under 2, meaning that, many countries around the world, by the way, including China, which is a really big deal, are actually going to depopulate over the next century. And so you have this kind of precondition that says there's actually been very little technological progress happening in the world, and the world is going to depopulate. And so AI is going to enter a world in which those two things are true. And I think this is incredibly important because we actually need AI to work in order to get productivity growth up, which is what we need to get economic growth up. And we actually need AI to work because we're going to need, we're going to need machines to do all the jobs that we're not going to have people to do. Because we're literally going to depopulate the planet over the next 100 years. And so I think the interplay of these factors is going to be much more interesting and frankly more complex than a lot of people have been thinking.
I'm going to follow this thread about kids. I know you have a kid, and one of my favorite lenses into how people think and what they value is what they're teaching their kids, what they're steering their kids towards.
Yeah.
Are there specific skills or even careers that you're steering your kid towards?
The way I think about this, we have a 10-year-old, and so we actually homeschool, and so we think a lot about this. So I think the way to think about the impact of AI on people, on specifically people as individuals, I think it's actually, a lot of people just focus on kind of this, this kind of very, I would say, straightforward and or overly simplistic view of just literally job gains, job losses, which we could talk about. But there's two specific things at the level of like an individual person or an individual kid. So I think it's pretty clear that AI is going to take people who are good at doing things and it's going to make them very good at doing things, right? And so it's going to be a tool that's going to sort of raise the average kind of across the board. And, look, you see that playing out already. Anybody who's in a position where they need to, write something or design something or write code or whatever, if they're pretty good at it today, they use AI and all of a sudden they're very good at it. And so there's sort of that aspect to it. And I think the way the education system writ large is going to kind of teach AI is going to be based, hopefully a lot on that. But then there's this other thing that's happening, which we're also starting to see, and we're really seeing it particularly in coding right now, where the really great people are becoming like spectacularly great, right? And so you kind of use the term. You think about like the super empowered individual, right? So the individual who is like really good at coding or really good at making movies or really good at making songs or really good at designing, making art or whatever those things are, or podcasting or, hopefully venture capital. If you're very good at it and you can really harness AI, you can become spectacularly great. And like super productive, right? And I'm sure you have a lot of friends in this category as well. But like the really really good coders are experiencing this right now. My friends who are really good coders are like, oh my god, all of a sudden I'm not twice as good as I used to be. I'm like 10 times as good as I used to be. And so I think at the unit of like n equals 1 of like an individual kid, I think the question is kind of how do you get them in a position where they're kind of this kind of super empowered individual, such that they're going to be really kind of deep in whatever it is they're going to do, but they're going to be deep in a way that's going to let them fully use the power of AI to be not just great, but to be like spectacularly great. And I think that's going to be the real, that's the real opportunity, and that at least that's what we're shooting for, and that's what I would encourage parents to shoot for.
So what I heard there is essentially agency. This word that we see on Twitter all the time is building agency. Them not waiting for someone to tell them what to do, figuring out what to do.
Yeah. So this thing with this term agency that's become very, very, very popular, certainly in California for the last couple of years. It's really interesting because it's. I had a lot of trouble with this early on because I'm like agency. Okay, what are they talking about? And what they're kind of talking about is like initiative, willingness to you could just do things. What is it? The Samuel Burge has the great term live player. You can be like a primary participant in events. And at first I was like, well, yeah, like that's kind of obvious, right? Like, of course. And then I'm like, oh, actually, it's not so obvious anymore because kind of your point, I think so much of our society is based on like, there are all these rules and everybody gets taught kind of by default, you're supposed to follow all these rules, right? And then everybody, if you like break the rules, like everybody gets freaked out. It's like, oh my God, he broke the rules. And so like we have somehow worked our way kind of, I don't know, psychologically, sociologically, kind of into a state in which I guess the natural assumption for a lot of people is, the thing that you for example, the thing you want to train kids to do is like follow all the rules. And, you could argue that kind of, for example, the school system, the K-12 school system or whatever has gotten kind of more and more focused on it over time. And it's like, no, you should actually, and again, especially unit N equals 1, like of your kid. It's like, okay, and look, there's something to be had. I just had this conversation with my 10-year-old last night. Actually, I rolled out the concept of, in order to lead, you must first learn to obey. Right. In order to, issue orders, you must learn how to follow orders and, try to keep him with some level of structure in his life and not just pure agency. But yeah, I mean, and so look, some rules are important and so forth. But yeah, no, look, there is like there's just a huge premium in life on being somebody who is able to like fully take responsibility for things, fully take charge, run an organization, lead a project, create something new. And maybe that has been maybe a little bit diminished in our culture over the last 30 years. It's healthy, that there's now a term for that is coming back into vogue. And again, like, that's how I view AI for kids is like, okay, AI should be the ultimate lever on the world for a kid with agency to be able to say, okay, I can actually be a primary contributor. Right, whether that's I can be a primary contributor in everything from developing new areas of physics to writing code to being an artist. To writing novels, like, whatever that thing is, I can fully participate in the world. I can really change things. The combination of that idea combined with this technology feels very healthy to me.
What is that quote about? Give me a lever and I'll move the world.
And I'll move the world. Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, so it's actually funny you mentioned that. So the early kind of scientists, including like Isaac Newton, were super obsessed with this concept of alchemy. Right, it's like they developed like Newton. He's like developed Newtonian physics and he developed like calculus and all these things. But the thing he was really obsessed with was alchemy, which was the thing he could never get to work. Right, and alchemy was the transmutation of lead into gold, which meant the transmutation of something that was very common, which was lead, into something that was very rare and valuable, which was gold. And there was this. He spent decades trying to figure out this thing called the philosopher's stone, which would be basically the machine or the process that would be able to transmute the rare, the common thing into the rare thing. Lead into gold, and he never figured it out. And it's incredibly frustrating. Nobody ever figured that out. And now we literally, with AI, have a technology that transfers sand into thought. Right?
Just blew my mind.
Right? The most common thing in the world, which is sand, converted into the most rare thing in the world, which is thought. Right, and so AI is the philosopher's stone. Like it is that. It actually is that, and it's just this incredibly powerful tool. And that's where I get so excited. I mean, and again, this is what we're doing with our 10-year-old, which is like, all right, a primary thing that we want to make sure to do is to make sure that he knows fully how to leverage and get benefit out of the philosopher's stone, right? Which is to say AI, and that's certainly central to everything we're teaching him. There's this meme going around that Silicon Valley people don't let their kids use computers, and I there may be a handful of people who are like that. I don't know. I think it's more honestly the other way around, which is the more you're kind of plugged into stuff in Silicon Valley, the more important it is to make sure that your kids actually fully understand this and know how to use it, and that's certainly the mode that we're in. And that's certainly the mode that I would encourage parents to think about.
I did not know your kid was homeschooled. That is super interesting. It's almost a statement on, education in today's day. Maybe is there any thoughts there? I'm just, for folks that maybe aren't in your tax bracket that want to help their kids be successful, maybe homeschool, maybe not, what advice would you have?
This is the challenge. And again, this kind of goes to how your original question, which is education. There's two completely different ways to think about education. The way it's usually thought about and talked about is kind of at the level of like a nation, right? So it's like a national level issue or maybe a state level issue in the U.S., which is basically like, how do you educate all the kids? And of course, that's incredibly important. And of course, you're going to need like some level of large scale system, like the national K-12 school system or something like that, in order to do that. But then there's this other question, which is like at N equals 1 for an individual kid. Like, what can you do with an individual kid? And so I'll just give you kind of the ultimate answer to that question, which is it's been known for centuries that the ideal way to teach a kid at the unit of N equals 1, by far the ideal way to do it is with one-on-one tutoring. Like if you just have an individual kid and the goal is to maximize an individual kid, by far you get the best results with one-on-one tutoring. And this is something that like every royal family knew in history. It's something that every aristocratic class knew in history. There's all these amazing examples. Alexander the Great was tutored by Aristotle. He took over the world, right? Like, many of the great kings and queens and, royal families and aristocrats and so forth, over the course of centuries, kind of always had this approach. There's actually also statistical evidence, analytical evidence that this is correct. There's this, massive question in the field of education, which is how do you improve educational outcomes? And basically, it turns out it's very hard to improve educational outcomes, except there's one method that always does it, which is called the Bloom 2 sigma effect, which is there's one method of education that routinely raises student outcomes by 2 standards of deviation, and we'll take a kid from the 50th percentile to the 99th percentile, and that's one-on-one tutoring, right? So again, right, if you go back to like at n equals 1, you have like a kid and a tutor, and they're in this like very tight loop with each other, where the kid is able to constantly kind of be on the leading edge of what they're capable of doing, and they can move incredibly fast, and they get kind of correction in real time. You get these better outcomes. But, to your question, like it's never been economically feasible for anybody other than the richest people in society to be able to provide one-on-one tutoring for kids. AI provides the very real prospect of being able to do that, right? Because obviously now, right, if you have a kid that's like super interested in something and they can talk to, an LLM about it, and they can ask an infinite number of questions and they can get instantaneous feedback. And in fact, you can even tell an LLM, it's like, teach me how to do the following. And you can say, wow, that's like, I don't quite understand what you're saying. Like, dumb it down for me a little bit. Okay, now quiz me, do I actually understand this? Like, people can just do this today, right? And so I think there's this like massive opportunity for parents, in many walks of life to be, with a little bit of time and focus, to be able to say, okay, my kid's probably still going to go through a traditional education system, but I'm going to augment this with AI tutoring. And of course, there's going to be tons of startups, right? And there already are that are going to try to build on all the products and services for this. Khan Academy, on the nonprofit side, has a big push to do this. And so, I think the broad answer might be a hybrid approach with schools plus one-to-one tutoring through AI. There's also this great, you may have heard, there's this great new private school system called Alpha, in which everything I just described is kind of the basis of their philosophy, which is, it's a combination of in-person schools and teachers, but it's also, heavily based on AI and AI tutoring. And so I think there's like there is a magic formula in here that I think is going to apply much more broadly. And it really, for parents interested in this, now would be a great time to really start to think hard about that and to look at the options.
It's interesting because there's all this concern that young people, jobs are not going to be there for them. AI is replacing them. On the flip side, there's what you're describing here. It feels like people coming in learning today are going to be move so fast and learn so much more. And where do you sit on this divide of like young people are in big trouble or they're actually going to be the ones winning in the end?
Yeah, so the job substitution, job loss thing is it's very reductive. I think it's an overly simplistic model. And again, it goes back to what I said at the very beginning, which is we've actually been in a regime for 50 years of very slow technological change in the economy. And so, and again, like I said, it's like at a half the rate of the previous era, and then a third the rate of like 100 years ago. And so we're coming out of this kind of phase where we've had like almost no technological progress in the economy. We've had remarkably little job churn as a result of that relative to any historical period. And so even if AI like ticks up, even if AI triples productivity growth in the economy, which would like be a massively big deal, it would take us back to the same level of job churn that was happening between 1870 and 1930. And if you go back and you read accounts of 1870 to 1930, people just thought the world was awash with opportunity, right? At that rate of technological transformation, kids were able to like develop new careers into new areas of the economy, building new kinds of products and services. I mean, a huge part of everything in our modern world today was kind of invented and proliferated kind of during that period. And so even if AI like triples the pace of economic change in the economy, it's going to just translate to like a much higher rate of economic growth. It's going to translate to a much higher rate of job growth. And, there'll be some level of like task level and job level substitution that will take place, but that will be swamped by the macro effects of economic growth and innovation that will happen. And that then corresponding to that, there will be, there will be hiring booms, I quite honestly, I think all over the place. And then again, go back to the other thing, which is like, this is all happening in the face of declining population growth and increasingly population shrinkage. And so human workers in many, many, many countries over the next, 10, 20, 30 years are going to be at more and more of a premium. Literally because you're going to have shrinking population levels. We don't really want to get into politics particularly, but it does feel like the world broadly is going to reverse course on the rates of immigration that we've had for the last 50 years. It seems to be kind of a broad-based kind of thing happening. Kind of with rise of nationalism, concerns about the rate of immigration, and immigration historically in countries like the U.S. It's kind of ebbed and flowed over time. based on kind of how the national mood shifts. And so if you sort of combine in a country like the US or any country in Europe, if you combine declining population with less immigration, the remaining human workers are going to be at a premium, not at a discount. And so I think that combination of kind of faster productivity growth, faster economic growth, and then slower population growth and less immigration actually means there's going to be much less of this kind of dystopian, no jobs thing. I just think it's probably totally off base.
That is extremely interesting. So what I'm hearing is you're not super worried about job loss. Is the key here that the timing kind of just works out? Does population decrease? Like all these kind of have to line up for there not to be this massive job loss with AI?
Yeah, well, look, if we didn't have AI, we'd be in a panic right now about what's going to happen to the economy, right? Because what we'd be staring at is a future of depopulation, and like depopulation without new technology would just mean that the economy shrinks, right? So it would mean that the economy kind of itself kind of shrinks over time. The opportunity diminishes. There are no new jobs. There are no new fields. There's no new source of consumer demand for spending on things. And so you would be very worried about going into a period of like severe decline and stagnation. Essentially you'd be looking at these like very dystopian scenarios of like an economy kind of self-euthanizing itself over time. So you'd be very worried about like the opposite of what everybody thinks that they're worried about. The only reason we're not worried about that is because we now know that we have the technology that can substitute for the lack of population growth, and then also for the lack of immigration that's likely. And so I would say the timing has worked out miraculously well in the sense that we're going to have AI and robots precisely when we actually need them to keep the economy from actually shrinking. And I just think like that's just like a fundamentally good news story. To get to the mass job loss thing that people are worried about, on the other side of things, you'd have to look at like far higher rates of productivity growth. You'd have to look at rates of productivity growth that are 10, 20, 30, 50% a year, something like that, which are, orders of magnitude higher than we've ever had in any economy in the history of the planet. It's possible that we get that. I mean, look, I have my utopian kind of temptation along with everybody else. If AI like radically transforms everything overnight, then maybe let's play out the kind of utopian scenario. You get to a much higher level of productivity growth. You get to a much higher level of technological change. Corresponding to that, you'll have a massive economic boom. You'll have a massive growth in the economy, and then corresponding with that, you'll have a collapse in prices. And so the price of goods and services that are sort of whatever you want to call it, affected by or commoditized by AI, the prices of those goods and services will collapse, right? It'll be price deflation, and then as a consequence of price deflation, everything that people are buying today gets a lot cheaper, and that's the equivalent of a gigantic increase in wealth, right, across the society. Right. Well, you take it this way. This is actually worth talking about because people, I think, get kind of sideways on this issue. So if AI is going to transform the economy as much as the, whatever utopians or dystopians or whatever kind of think that it will, the necessary economic calculation of what happens is massive productivity growth. The consequence of massive productivity growth, what that literally means mechanically, is more output requiring less input, right? So you get more economic output for less input. Right. So you're substituting in AI for human workers or whatever. And as a consequence, you get like this massive boom in output, with much lower input costs. The result of that is you get gluts of goods and services in all those affected sectors. The result of those gluts is you get collapsing prices. Right. The collapsing prices mean that the thing today that costs you $100 now costs you $10 and now costs you $1. That's the equivalent of giving everybody a giant raise. Right. Because now they have all this additional spending power. That additional spending power then translates to economic growth, right? The development of new fields. Everybody's like materially like much better off very quickly. And then, by the way, to the extent that you do have unemployment coming out the other side of that, it's now much cheaper to provide the kind of social safety net to prevent people from being immiserated, right? Because the prices of all the goods and services that like a welfare program has to pay from, they're all collapsing, right? And so the price of healthcare collapses, the price of housing collapses, the price of education collapses, the price of everything else collapses. Because this incredible impact that AI is having. And so in this kind of utopian dystopian scenario that people have, it's not there's no scenario in which like everybody's just poor. In fact, it's quite the opposite, which is everybody gets a lot richer because prices collapse. And then it's actually much easier to pay for the social safety net for the people who, for some reason can't find a job. And so like maybe we end up in that scenario. I mean, the kind of optimistic part of me says, yeah, maybe AI is that powerful and maybe the rest of the economy can actually change to accommodate that, and maybe that'll happen. But the result of that is going to be a much better news story than people think it's going to be. And again, everything I've just described, by the way, is like just a very straightforward extrapolation of very basic economics. I'm not making any like bold predictions of what I just said. This is just like a straightforward mechanical process that plays itself out if you have higher rates of productivity growth, which are necessarily the results of higher rates of technological growth. And so I think we're looking at, and to be clear, I think we're looking at a world that's not like radically transformed the way that maybe the utopians think that it will be, or the dystopians think it will be. I think it'll be more incremental for reasons we can discuss. But I think that incremental, overwhelmingly, I think that process is going to be a good news process. And then even if it's much faster, it's also going to be a good news process. It'll just be a good news process in the other way that I described.
I love hearing optimism and good news. I will also add that I was researching you ahead of this chat, and you've been right so many times about where the world is heading. That's why I'm especially excited to talk to you. I'll give you a short list. I imagine there are many more things. Okay, so one, you were right about the web and web browsers becoming important. You were right about software eating the world. Check. You, in 2011, you said that in 10 years, we're going to have 5 billion people using smartphones. And I believe the actual number ended up being 6 billion. You also, you had this debate with Peter Thiel that I came across where you were debating whether technology has stopped progressing or if new technology will continue to emerge, and you were arguing there's progress will continue, and he was like, no, I think we're done with cool technology. You were right. I imagine there are many more things you were right about. So again, I love hearing your predictions because I feel like they're actually going to turn out to be correct.
So I should start by saying I've been wrong about tons of things, but I buried those out back behind the shed.
Delete them from the internet. No web browser can discover them.
I have them nuked out of the Internet Archive so that they're never seen again. I'm wrong plenty of times also. But yeah, I mean, look, I think some of those I got right. By the way, I will say on the Peter one, I've come much more around to Peter's point of view. I would probably argue that one like quite a bit differently today than I did, and I would give his view I think a lot more credit. And it actually goes to the kind of the discussion the kind of conversation we just had, which is the real form of what Peter was arguing was we have lots of progress in bits, right? But we have very little progress in atoms, right? And that's the real core of what he was arguing. And I think I was a little bit, I don't know, missing that or kind of glossing that over a little bit because I was so focused on making sure people understood, no, there actually is still progress happening in bits. But I think, a lot of his critiques around the lack of progress in atoms is real. And again, this goes back to this thing of like he's talked about this for a long time. In the last 50 years, there has just been very little technological innovation in most of the economy. There's been very little technological innovation, in particular, anything involving atoms. There's been very little real-world technological change. There just hasn't been. Like the built world is just not that different today than it was 50 years ago. And if you contrast that, if you compare and contrast 1870 and 1930, it was a dramatically different world. If you contrast 1930 and 1970, it was a dramatically different world. If you contrast 1970 today, it's not that different. Right. And look, you just see that you could just like walk around and it's just like, oh, yeah, there's a bunch of buildings that were built in like 1960. Right. And there's a bridge that was built in like 1930. And there's a dam that was built in like 1910. And there's a city that was founded in, 1880. And like, what have we done? Right? Like, where are our new cities? Where are our new dams? Where's the California high-speed rail? Like, like what's going on here? And so, like, I think he is right about a lot of that. Again, this is also why I think that AI is not going to have as rapid an impact. It's not going to be, again, this kind of utopian or dystopian view of like everything changes overnight. I think it just kind of can't happen because of the reasons that Peter articulates, which is there's so much about how the world works that's basically just like wrapped up in red tape, like bureaucratic process, rules, restrictions, the politics. By the way, unions, cartels, oligopolies, there's all these structures in the world that are kind of economic or political or regulatory structures that basically prevent things from changing. And so, I mean, let's take a great example, like AI's impact on the healthcare system. Like by rights, AI is going to have a dramatic impact on the healthcare system and in very positive ways. But, large parts of the medical system today are cartels, right? And so there's the doctors are a cartel, and like nurses are a cartel, like hospitals are a cartel. And then there's this push to like nationalize all the healthcare systems. And then you've got a government monopoly, right? And it's like, and guess what cartels and monopolies don't like is they don't like rapid change, right? And so, you show up as a kid and you're like, wow, I've got like this new technology to do like AI medicine. And they're like, oh, well, does it threaten doctor jobs? Well, in that case, we're going to block it. So, and I think a lot of consumers, by the way, I see this in my life, and you'll probably see this in your life also, which is, like ChatGPT is like almost certainly a better doctor than your doctor today. But like ChatGPT can't get a license to practice medicine, right? So it can't substitute for a doctor. It can't prescribe medications, right? It can't, perform procedures, right? And so there are these anyway. So Peter, I think, was very articulate and has been for a long time on like, no, there are actually real structural impediments in the economy and in the political system that we have that actually prevent the rates of change that are anywhere near the rates of change that people had in the past. And you can maybe say optimistically, maybe the presence of the new magic technology of AI, maybe it causes us to revisit a lot of these assumptions for the first time in decades to really say, okay, is this really the world we want to live in? Don't we actually want to get to the future faster? So maybe that would be the optimistic view.
It's time to build, somebody famously said. I in my calendar, I actually have that as when I start to work. It's time to build. That's my block in the morning of the day. Thank you for that. Okay, I love the way you go from just like macro to just like N of one. And I want to go to N of one. A lot of the listeners of this podcast are product managers, they're engineers, they're designers. There's a lot of founders, but there's also a lot of non-founders. There's a lot of people building product that aren't founders. And obviously, a lot of people are worried about where their career is going. Is one of these roles going to disappear? Is one of these roles going to do really well? How do I stay up to date? You're close with a lot of teams, a lot of product teams. What's your sense of just the future of these three very specific roles? Product manager, engineer, designer?
This, I think, is a really funny question. So these three roles in particular, obviously, are kind of the central roles for building, for tech companies. So the way I've been describing it is, the concept of the Mexican standoff, right? Which is the movie scene where the two guys have guns pointed at each other's heads. Mm-hmm. And then if you watch like John Woo movies, he does the three-way Mexican standoff where you've got like a triangle, people and like and of course it's John Woo movie they've got guns in both hands. So they're all each is aiming at the other two.
Yeah.
And you got this kind of standoff situation. And so the way I've been describing this is there's like a Mexican standoff happening between those three roles, between product manager, designer, and coder. Specifically the following, which is every coder now believes they can also be a product manager and a designer, right? Because they have AI. Every product manager thinks they can be a coder and a designer. And then every designer knows they can be a product manager, right? And a coder. Right. And so people in each of those roles now, know or believe that with AI, they don't need the other two roles anymore. Right. They can do that because they can have AI do that. And then, of course, there's the real irony, which is, all three of them are going to realize that AI can also be a better manager. Right. So they're going to be aiming the guns up the org chart. But that's probably that's the next phase. And what I think is so fascinating about this Mexican staff is they're actually all kind of correct, I think. Right. Which is AI is actually a pretty good, it's actually now a really good coder. It's actually now a really good designer, and it's also a really good product manager, right? It's actually good at doing all three of those things, or at least doing a lot of the tasks involved in those three jobs. And so again, this goes back to the super empowered, this kind of idea of the super empowered individual, where if I'm a coder, step one is like I need to make sure that I really understand AI coding and like what that means and how coding is going to change in the future. I need to understand, specifically how to go from being a coder who writes code entirely by hand to being a coder who orchestrates a dozen instances of coding bots. There's a change in the actual job of coding itself, which is happening right now. But the other part of it is, okay, how do I become that super empowered individual? How do I become a coder that also then harnesses AI so that I can also be a great product manager and I can also be a great designer, right? And then the same thing for the product manager, which is how do I make sure that I can now use coding tools? How do I make sure I can also, do AI-based design? And the same thing for the designer, which is how do I use AI to also become a coder and also become a product manager? And then what you get is maybe those individual roles change. Like maybe those are not anymore sort of stovepipe roles of the way that they have been for the last 30 years or whatever. But what happens is the talented people in any of those roles become super empowered and they become good at doing all three of those things. And then those people become incredibly valuable because then those are people who can actually build and design new products right from scratch, which is like which is the most valuable thing. And so I think that's the opportunity.
So I love this answer. So what I'm hearing is essentially, if you're amazing at any of these three roles, you will do well.
Number one, if you're amazing at these roles, that's great. But also, part of being amazing at these roles is also being able to fully harness the new technology, right? So if you're a master coder today and you don't ever get to the point where you figure out how to use AI to leverage your coding skills and do more, right? Like at some point you are going to hit an issue. right? Here's another way economists talk about this, which is there's the concept of the job, but the job is not actually the atomic unit of what happens in the workplace. The atomic unit of what happens in the workplace is the task. And so, and then what the way the economists think about it is a job is a bundle of tasks. And everybody wants to talk about job loss, but really what you want to look at is task loss, right? The tasks changing. I mean, the classic example of task changing. Classic example of task changing was once upon a time, executives never used typewriters or personal computers themselves, right? You know, if you were a vice president of a company in 1970 or whatever, you did not have like a typewriter or a computer on your desk typing things. You had a secretary who you dictated memos to, right? And then there was this change where like email started to show up, and what would happen was the job of the secretary then went from the job of the secretary changed from sending out letters with stamps on them to like sending or receiving emails with the other admins. And then the secretary would print out the email and bring it into the executive's office. And the executive office would read the email on paper, scroll the reply, and give that message back to the secretary, who would go back and type it into the computer on his or her desk and send it as an email. Fast forward to today, none of that happens. Now executives just do all their own email. They still have secretaries or admins, but they're now doing different tasks. You know, they're travel planning and orchestrating events and like doing all these other things, that the great admins do. And then the task set, ironically, of the executive has expanded to do actually more of the clerical work themselves, actually like sit there and like type their own memos, which again, 50 years ago, they never would have done that. And so the executive job still exists, the secretary job still exists, but the tasks have changed. And I think that's like a great example of what's going to happen in coding. The tasks are going to change. It's what's going to happen in product management. The tasks are going to change. Designer tasks are going to change. And so the job persists longer than the individual tasks. And then as the tasks change enough, then that's when the jobs change. And so at the level of an individual, you kind of want to think of like, okay, I have this job. The job is a bundle of tasks. I need to be really good at making sure that I can like swap the tasks out, right? I can really adapt, use the new technology, get really good at AI coding, for example. I can, and then you want to kind of add skills. I can also get really good at design. I can also get really good at product management because I've got this new tool. So you want to kind of pick up more and more scope as you do that. And then, 10 years from now, is your job title coder or coder, designer, product manager, or is it just I build products, or is it just I tell the AI how to build products? It's like whatever that job is called, who even knows what it's going to be? But it's going to be incredibly important because the people doing that job are going to be orchestrating the AI. And so that's the track that the best people are going to be on. And I think that's the thing to lean hard into.
I think people aren't fully grasping just specifically software engineering and how much that is changing. Like, it's pretty clear we're going to be in a world soon where engineers are not actually writing code, which I think a year ago we would not have thought. And now it's just clearly this is where it's heading. It's like there's going to be this artisanal experience of sitting there writing code, which is so crazy how much that job is going to change.
Yeah. So again, here I go back, and again, pardon maybe the history lesson, but like I go back like coding. So the first, do you know the original definition of the term calculator? Do you know what that referred to?
No.
It referred to people. Right. So back before there were like electronic calculators or computers or any of these things, the way that you would actually do computing, the way that you would do calculating, like the way that an insurance company would calculate actuarial tables, or the military would like calculate, I don't know, whatever troop logistics formulas or whatever it was. The way that you would do it is you would actually have a room full of people. And by the way, these are like big rooms. You could have hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of people doing this. And you would actually figure out, you have somebody at the head of the room who is like responsible for like whatever the mathematical equation was. And then they would parcel out the individual mathematical calculations to people sitting at desks who were doing them all by hand, right? And that job title was those people were calculators, right? And so we've gone from a world in which you literally have people doing mathematical equations by hand. Then we got the first computers. The first computers, of course, didn't have programming languages, right? They only had machine code, right? So the first computers were programmed with ones and zeros. And so the task of the programmer became do the ones and zeros. And then that became punch cards. And you can still, there's still people, kicking, today who, whose job as a programmer was to like deal with the punch cards. And then you got actually this big breakthrough, which was called assembly language, which was basically the way to do machine code, but like with some level of like English kind of added to it. And then the best programmers did assembly language. And then, when I was coming up, it was higher level languages like C that compiled into machine code. And that's what programmers did. And then I still remember when scripting, when scripting languages, we developed JavaScript at Netscape, and then Python took off, and Perl and these other scripting languages. When scripting languages, took off in the 2000s, there was this big fight, in the technical community, which is scripting real programming or not, right? Because it's kind of cheating, right? Because real programmers write code that compiles to machine code, and like real programmers do like memory management themselves, and they do all they get this whole craft of writing C code. And these JavaScript or Python programmers are just doing this kind of lightweight thing. It doesn't even really count as coding. And of course, the answer is yes, it very much counted. And now most coding is done with the scripting languages, right? Which have, you see my point. The scripting languages have abstracted away like 5 layers of detail underneath that people used to do by hand, and they don't anymore. And then to your point, like AI coding is the next layer on that. AI coding actually abstracts away the process of actually writing the scripting code. Right. And so in one sense, this is a really big deal for all the obvious reasons. But on the other hand, it's like, okay, this is the next layer of the task redefinition under the job of programmer. Right now, what's the job of the programmer? It's, to your point, it's not necessarily to write the code by hand. But what it is now is, all right, now, if you talk to the world's best programmers today, what they'll tell you is, oh, my job is I'm sitting there and I'm orchestrating 10 code bots, right? Coding bots that are running in parallel, right? And literally they sit there and they shift from browser to browser or terminal to terminal. And their day job now is kind of arguing with the AI bots to try to get them to write the right code, right? And then debug it and fix the problems and change the spec and do all these things. And so now the job of the programmer is to argue with the coding bots. But if you don't know how to write the code yourself, you don't know how to evaluate what the coding bots are giving you, right? And so you asked about the 10, our 10-year-old is super into computers and super into programming. And what I'm telling and he's using Claude and ChatGPT, Copilot, and all these things. And what I'm telling him is look. And by the way, he loves vibe coding. He's on Replit all the time doing vibe coding. Doing games. He's sitting there. It's hysterical, right? Because he's sitting there. It's a 10-year-old basically who's spends 2 hours at dinner arguing with an AI for fun, right? Right. But what I'm telling him is, no, look, you need to still fully understand and learn how to write and understand code, because the coding bots are giving you code. If it doesn't work, or if it's not doing what you expect, or it's not fast enough, or whatever, you need to be able to understand the results of what the AI is giving you. Right. In the same way that somebody who's writing scripting language code does need to understand ultimately how the microprocessor works. And so again, it's kind of this up leveling of capability where you actually want the depth to be able to go down and be able to understand what the thing is actually doing, even if you're not spending your day actually doing that by hand. And again, I look at that and I'm like, okay, now programmers are going to be 10 times or 100 times or 1,000 times more productive than they used to be. Right. And that is overwhelmingly a good thing. The tasks are definitely changing. The nature of the job is changing. But are human beings going to be involved in the coding process and overseeing the AI coding and all that? And the answer is, of course, absolutely, 100%, no question.
So you're in the camp of still learn to code, still a valuable skill.
Oh yeah, totally. Well, again, if you want to be one of these look, if you just want to put your self on autopilot and I can't be bothered and I'm just going to have AI write the code and it's going to generate whatever it does and that's fine. And I'm going to be, if the goal is to be a mediocre coder, then just let the AI do it. It's fine. The AI is going to be perfectly good at generating infinite amounts of mediocre code. No problem. It's all good. If the goal is I want to be one of the best software people in the world and I want to build new software products and technologies that really matter, then yeah, you 100% want to you want to go all the way down. You want your skill set to go all the way down to assembly and machine code. You want to understand every layer of the stack. You want to deeply understand what's happening at the level of the chip, right, and the network and so forth. By the way, you also really deeply want to understand how the AI itself works, right? Because you want to, right? Because if people understand how the AI works, they're clearly able to get more value out of it than somebody who doesn't understand how it works. Right? I mean, you're always more productive if you know how the machine works, right? When you use the machine. And so, yeah, the super empowered individual on the other end of this that wants to do great things with the new technology, yes, you 100% want to understand this thing all the way down the stack, because you want to be able to understand what it's giving you, right? And when something doesn't work or when something isn't right, you want to be able to really quickly understand why that is. By the way, again, this goes back to education. AI is your best friend at helping you learn all that, right? Because it's I need to understand, I don't know, this isn't fast enough. I need to figure out as a coder, I need to figure out how to do a different approach to memory management or something. And you can be well, I don't quite know how to do that. Okay, AI, let's spend 10 minutes. Teach me how to do this. Right? Teach me what this all means, right? So all of a sudden you have this incredibly synergistic relationship with the AI where it's also helping you get better at the same time that it's doing a lot of work for you.
By the way, I was going to say, I was a big Perl programmer. I was an engineer for 10 years and that was my language of choice.
Do you remember? I don't know when you were doing it, but do you remember that at least early on? Do you remember? Did you ever hit this where like C coders were like looking down their nose at you, being like,
For sure. It's like, this is so slow. It's not going to scale. What are you spending all your time on this thing?
Yeah, exactly. And of course, and again, it was sort of this thing where, they were sort of correct, which is at the beginning, it wasn't, fast enough or whatever. By the end, they were definitely wrong, right? Which is it got much better, much faster. And, it swept the world. Most coding today happens in scripting languages. And then, by the way, the people along the way, the people who really understood the scripting languages and the people who understood all the lower level systems, they were the ones who were able to actually make the scripting languages actually work really well. Right. And so that was a great example of this kind of adaptation. And then again, the result of that was, a far higher number of people writing code with scripting languages than were ever writing code with lower level languages. And I think this will just kind of be a more dramatic version of that.
I love that Perl was designed by a linguist. I don't know if you remember that part. And that's what made it so nice to code with.
Well, that's funny because, of course, it was so notorious for being impossible to understand. So
how ironic. Prove what works. I saw this firsthand when I was at Airbnb, where our experimentation platform was critical for analyzing what worked and where things went wrong. And the same team that built experimentation at Airbnb built Eppo. Datadog then lets you go beyond the numbers with session replay. Watch exactly how users interact with heat maps and scroll maps to truly understand their behavior. And all of this is powered by feature flags that are tied to real-time data so that you can roll out safely, target precisely, and learn continuously. Datadog is more than engineering metrics. It's where great product teams learn faster, fix smarter, and ship with confidence. Request a demo at datadoghq.com/Lenny. That's datadoghq.com/Lenny. Coming back to this kind of triad, the other element that I hear more and more of is the skill of taste and design and user experience. It feels like that's a very hard skill to learn. And to me, it tells me design is going to be much more valuable in the future.
Yeah, that's right. And again, here, this is a great example. So the task level, the task level of like design the perfect icon, right, is going to be like, all right, the AI is going to do that all day long. It's going to give you 1,000 icon designs. It's going to be great. Like, it's going to be fantastic. Like, whatever, and there will still, by the way, there will still be some level of human icon design or whatever, but like the AI is going to get really good at that. But like, what are we trying to do? Like, kind of capital D design of like, all right, what is this thing for? And how is this going to function in the world of human beings? And like, is this going to make people happy when they use it? Is it going to make people feel good about themselves? Is it going to fit into the rest of their life? Is it going to, challenge them in the right way? All these kinds of higher level questions that the great designers have always thought about. Like the job of designer, right, will involve much more of those higher level, more important components. And then again, with AI doing a lot more of the underlying tasks. And so, one way to think about it is, you think of like, the world's best designers, Johnny Ive or whatever, and you could be like, wow, like if I'm a designer today, if I'm a 25-year-old designer and I aspire to be, Johnny Ive in a decade, it's all of a sudden I have a new path that I can use to kind of get to get there, which is because Johnny Ive did everything he did without AI. Now, a young designer can be like, wow, if I really harness AI in a decade, I'm going to be like the best designer the world's ever seen, because it's not just going to be me. It's going to be me plus being so super empowered by this technology to be able to do so much more. And then so much more of my time and attention is going to be able to be focused on these higher level things that most designers never get to. And I think that's going to be another great example of that.
So maybe what I'm hearing here is kind of this T-shaped strategy of if you want to be successful in any three of these roles, be very, very, very good at that specific role, product management, engineering, design, and then get good enough at these other two roles.
Well, so I think that's great. I think that's really, really relevant. And then, Scott Adams unfortunately just passed away, which is a real tragedy. But I referred for years to actually Scott Adams. He had this famous kind of career advice he would give people, which I think makes a lot of sense, which dovetails with what you're saying, which is he used to say it's like, look, he said, I could have been a pretty good cartoonist, or I could have been like pretty good at business. But the fact that I was a cartoonist who understood business made me like spectacularly great at making Dilbert, right? Because even the world's best cartoonists who didn't understand business could have never written Dilbert. And then the world's best business people who didn't know how to do cartoons couldn't have done Dilbert. It took somebody who actually had both of those skills to be able to make Dilbert, right? Which is one of the most successful cartoons in history, right? And so the way Scott always described it was that from a career development standpoint, the additive effect of being good at two things is like more than double, right? The additive effect of being good at three things is more than triple, right? Because you become a super relevant specialist in the combination of the domains. And you see this all. I mean, you see this all over. You see this all over the economy. You see this all over the economy. But I'll give you an example. Hollywood, just Hollywood as an example. There are a lot of writers who can't direct a movie, and they can be very successful writers. There are a lot of directors who can't write a movie, they can be very successful directors. But the superstars in the entertainment industry are the people who can write and direct, right? And they don't have a term for those. They call those auteurs, right? And that's those are the people who are like the real creative forces that move the field. And so again, and by the way, Hollywood, it's just really funny. It's been spending a lot of time talking to Hollywood people about AI. Hollywood has the same Mexican standoff going right now that we described in tech, except in Hollywood, for example, for filmmaking, it's the director, it's the writer, and the actor, right? Because the director is now thinking, wow, I don't need the writer anymore because the AI can write the script, and I don't need the actor anymore because I can have AI actors. The writer is saying, wow, I don't need the director because the AI can direct the movie and the AI can do the actors. And the actor is saying, I don't need either one of these guys. I can have the AI direct the thing. I can have the AI write the thing, and I'm just going to show up and do my performance, right? And so it's the same kind of triangular configuration. And again, what's great about it is they're all correct, right? Each person in each of those three fields is going to be able to expand laterally and pick up those additional skills, and then as a consequence, you're going to have more people who can write and direct, or write and act, or direct and act, or do all three. And I think to your point, like your T-shaped thing, like I think that's going to be true basically across the entire economy. And if you think about the T, if you think about the T configuration, it's like, yeah, the breadth, the top of the T is like, how many individual domains are you familiar enough with to be able to use the AI tools to be able to do really good work? And then this part of the T is how deep can you go in at least one of those domains so that you really, really deeply know what you're doing. But like if you're like super deep on coding and you can use AI to do design and you can use AI to do product management, right? That's your T right there. And you're a triple threat at the top of the T, but with this level of technical grounding underneath that. And I mean, at that point, you're the super powered individual. You're going to be able to just perform like feats of magic. For example, in terms of designing and building your products, the people in my generation couldn't have even dreamed of. And so I think that this is a universal kind of theory that I think can apply across the entire economy.
I'm going to invent a new framework right now. Okay, forget the T framework. I'm picturing an F sideways or an E, where there's two or three, I don't know, downward parts. And so what I'm hearing is get good at least two.
Yeah, I think that's right. The combination, yeah. My friend Larry Summers had a different version of the Scott Adams thing, which is he used to tell people, he said, the key for career planning is, he said, don't be fungible, right? And he's an economist, and so that was economics speak. And what that means essentially is don't be replaceable. And so don't be a cog, right? So and what that meant was don't just be one thing, right? So if you're quote unquote, again, just a designer, just a product manager, just a coder, like then in theory you can be swapped in or out. But if you have this E or F, laying on its side kind of thing, and if you have this combination of things that's actually quite rare, then all of a sudden you're not fungible. Not only you're not fungible, like you're actually massively important because you're one of the only people in the world who can actually do that combination of things. And yeah, that your ability not to become one of those people is like just titanically enhanced with AI as compared to anything we've ever seen before.
This is so interesting because I've worked with people that are good at these two skills, and they were always called unicorns at the company. Right. She can code and design. Oh my God. And what I'm hearing here is this is what you need to become. You need to become really good at least two things. I think you used the term smokestack or something, where it's like PM over here, engineer, design. And what I'm hearing here is you need to get good at least two of these skills. The silos of these two roles are disappearing.
That's right. And again, I can't overstress the following for anybody listening to this. The thing about AI that I think people are just like not getting enough benefit out of yet is just it will teach you. Like, this is amazing. Like, there's never been a technology before where you can ask it, like, teach me how to do this thing. And so I always feel like it's like people spend too much. It's one of these things where it's like so much focus on figuring out how to use like a large language model. It's like, okay, what am I going to try to get it to do for me? Right. Which is, of course, very important. But the other side of it is, what can I get it to teach me how to do, right? And it's just as good at that, right? And so again, this level of latent superpower. Like, people who really want to like improve themselves and like develop their career should be spending every spare hour, in my view, at this point, talking to an AI, being like, all right, train me up, like super empower me. Tell me how to, train me how to be, I'm a coder. Train me how to be a product manager. It will happily do that. It knows exactly how to do that. Run me, make me problems, make me assignments, then evaluate my results, right? And it will do that just as happily as it will do work, quote unquote, for you.
2 tricks I've heard along those lines. One is to watch the output, what the agent is doing and thinking as it's doing the work. So if you're not an engineer, just sit there and watch it think and make decisions. And it's almost become this like layer on top of learning to code, is learning to see what the agent is doing and thinking, because that teaches you about architecture. And the other is a couple podcast guests have mentioned this. When you get stuck and then you figure out how to unstuck yourself, you ask it, what could I have done differently? What could I have said that would have avoided this error in the first place?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, look, on that first one, and this is what I'm doing with my 10-year-old. Yeah, look, if you ask an AI, this is a really good point. So if you ask an AI, write me this code, and then it doesn't, and it comes back and it doesn't work right. Like, if all you know is like single function I asked it and it gave me back something that's not good, like, well, what do you even do with that, right? Like, you don't understand why it gave you that result. Do you really understand it? Do you even understand what to tell it to try to get it to do something different? But to your point, like, if you actually watch what it's doing, and then you have the grounding, kind of that leg of your E or your F. If you have that grounding, then you can be like, oh, I see what it's doing. I see where it made the mistake. I see where it went sideways. And then you're all of a sudden able to intervene and able to say, no, that's not what I meant. Do this other thing. Right. And so, and again, this is a big part of having the actual kind of, synergistic relationship, is that you understand. And by the way, look, I mean, this is like everything I'm saying is, everything that we're saying right now also is the same as if you're working with human beings, right? Like, if you and I are colleagues and I, would ask you to do something, you'd come back with something completely different. Like, I do need to understand what was happening in your head, right? In order to be able to give you feedback, right? If I just tell you, oh, that's wrong, it doesn't, like, nothing happens. I need to actually understand. I need to have theory of mind, right? I need to understand what you were thinking in order to really give you the right feedback. And again, the great thing with AI is AI will happily sit there and explain all day long why it's doing what it's doing. It'll happily critique itself. And you can do this. By the way, it's also a very fun thing where you can have one AI critique the other AI, right? Which is another thing, which is like you have one AI write the code, you have another AI debug the code, and so you can actually you can play the AIs off against each other and get them to argue with each other. These are all the kinds of skills that are going to become, I think, incredibly valuable.
I think people call those LLM councils.
Yes,
they're talking to each other.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I do feel like if I were like I have no design background. I've always wanted to design. I've always wanted to be a great designer. It feels like that's the hardest one to learn of all these three, by just watching and talking, right? Because there's a lot of exposure hours, as folks have used this term, just like, how do you learn to be a great designer? That feels like that's going to be really hard and valuable.
So my true confession is I've always kind of wanted to be a cartoonist, but I have no like art skills. But as we're talking, I'm like, it might be time.
Their time has come, Marc.
Yes.
I want to pivot to founders, maybe your bread and butter. Sure. You spend a lot of time with the most cutting edge AI forward founders. I'm curious what you see them do, how you see them, some way they operate that's maybe blowing your mind about how the future of starting a company looks, how the future of AI forward companies look. Yeah,
so this is it's a very topical topic that's all playing out in real time right now, on the leading edge. So I think there's like 3 layers of it, and see if this makes sense. I think there's like 3 layers of it. I think layer 1 is they're thinking, all right, how does AI redefine the products themselves, right? And this is kind of the time honored kind of thing that happens at technology transitions, and this is kind of what a lot of venture capital is based on, which is okay, there's a new technology that comes out, and maybe it's the personal computer or the iPhone or the internet, or now it's AI, and it's like, all right, is this a new capability that gets added to existing products? Right. So all of a sudden you've got, I don't know, an existing, software business, and now you've got your, PC version of it, and now you got your iPhone version of it, and you just kind of keep on going. And, you kind of add the new technology kind of gets kind of added into the mix. It's kind of another ingredient into an existing formula. And of course, a lot of new technologies are like that, right? I don't know when flash storage came out or something, it didn't really redefine the software industry, because people just went from using, hard disk using flash storage or something. But when the internet came out, like basically old school on-prem software for the most part, not entirely, but like a lot of it died and just got replaced by like web software. Right. And so sometimes you get the kind of, it's additive to an existing thing. Sometimes you get it redefines an entire product category, redefines an industry. The actual, in many cases, the companies themselves turn over. And so there's sort of this question, and like, an example, you just mentioned Nano Banana. So like a great example is there are these businesses like, just take Adobe, like, Photoshop has built a 40-year franchise in image editing. Okay, is AI a sort of a feature now that gets added to Photoshop to be able to do AI-based image editing? Or, do you just like stop editing images entirely because you're using Nano Banana and all images are just being generated, and it's just easier to just have AI generate a new image than it is to try to edit an old one? And so I think, there's many areas of tech in which that question is being asked, and, the answers I think will vary by domain, but obviously, as a venture firm, we're betting hard on many of these categories being totally reinvented, and a lot of the best founders are trying to figure out how to do that. So that's kind of AI, changing the definition of the product. I think the next layer is actually a lot of what we've already talked about, which is AI changing the jobs. And so it's a lot of what we already talked about. But like, okay, if I'm a founder of a company and I've got if I have room in my budget for 100 coders. How do I get those coders to be super empowered AI coders, not the kind of coders I used to have? And if they're super empowered AI coders, then does that mean, do I still need the 100? Maybe now I only need 10. Or does that mean I still want 100, but now they're doing 10 times more, right? And so that, as like a lot of the best founders are working on that right now. And then I think the third shoe to drop hasn't quite dropped yet, but it's kind of the big one, which is like, all right, like the basic idea of having a company. Right. Does that change? And again, here you've got this concept of the superpowered individual, which is like, okay, can you have entire companies where you have basically the founder does everything, right? Because what the founder is doing is like overseeing an army of AI bots. And there's sort of this, there's kind of this holy grail in our industry that's been running for a long time, which is like, can you have like the $1 billion outcome? And, we've had a few of those over the years. Bitcoin is probably the most spectacular example. With Ethereum right behind it, which wasn't quite one person, but, a very small team. You had, kind of Instagram and WhatsApp that had very big outcomes with very small teams. Every once in a while you get one of these things where you just, something hits and you just have a, very small number of people associated with it. But that said, most software companies obviously end up with, huge numbers of employees. And so I think, the most leading edge founders are thinking of like, okay, how do I reconstitute the actual very definition or idea of having a company, and can you have a company that's literally basically just all AI? And if you're doing if you're doing anything in the real world, that's hard. But if you're doing software like that seems like it might be feasible in some cases. And then there's like the ultimate example of that, which is like can you have like AI? Can you have like autonomous like AI economy stuff happening where you have like AI bots on the blockchain or something? That are basically out there like functioning as a business and like making money, and just literally where the AI does all the work itself and just get issues me dividends. And so maybe that's the final outlier result. We have a few founders who are chasing that kind of thing. So I would describe that as kind of the ladder that the best founders are on.
Super interesting. This whole idea of a $1 billion company, I think it depends on your definition of what this is. Like an outcome I could see. Running my newsletter. As one person with some contractors, there's so many little annoying things that I have to deal with just support tickets and issues and bugs. And like, it's hard for me to imagine actually a $1 billion company, even if AI is handling so much of your support, because there's just so many random edge cases that I'm just constantly like filling out forms. And so I guess depends on, do you have contractors? Does that count? As like what does it count? What does it mean to be a one person? But I'm just like, I can't see that happening.
Yeah, I mean, look, Bitcoin, Satoshi pulled it off.
But like, the open source community, like, does that count? I don't know. Yeah. I guess it counts. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So yeah, and I would say I don't propose to have answers here, but more just like the smartest people I know are many of the smartest people I know are thinking hard about this. So.
Yeah. What do you think about moats? A big question constantly in AI, the fact that everything's changing. Just what's your guys' thesis on moats in AI? Is that even a thing? Do you care?
My experience with like really big technological transformations, and of course I kind of lived this directly with the internet and I saw this happen, is the really big technological transformations, they take a long time to play out, and there's all of these structural implications that just kind of cascade out over time. And then there's kind of this like rush to judgment up front where people kind of say, oh, it's therefore obvious that, XYZ. It's therefore obvious that this kind of company is going to be the company of the future, not that kind. It's obvious that this incumbent's going to be able to adapt and this other one isn't. It's obvious that there's economic opportunity in this kind of startup and not in these others. It's obvious that the moats are going to be in this area of the technology, but not in this other area. And what everybody does is they kind of state those things with like just an enormous amount of self-assurance, where they really sound like they have all the answers. And then what happens is these ideas kind of saturate the media, right? Because the media naturally prizes like definitive answers over open questions. Because you want, like when CNBC is like booking guests, they want a guest who's going to come on and say, yes, this is the way it's going to be X. Not like, I think that's a really good question, and let's like debate it from like 8 different angles. And what I found is if you look back on those predictions a few years later, and you can do this, by the way, if you pull up like coverage of the internet from like 1993 through like 1997, or even through like, for that matter, even through like 2005 or 2010, and you look at like the kinds of confident statements people were making in the first 10 or 15 years, like I would say like almost all of them were wrong. Again, generally like quite badly wrong. And so I think the process, if there's going to be a massive amount of technological change, it's going to be like, I don't know, 5 or 6 layers of like structural change that will play out over time. And again, we've talked about a lot of this, but like it implications on like, what are the definitions of products? What are the definitions of companies? What are the definitions of jobs? What are the definitions of industries? How does this play out at the national level? How does this play out at the global level? How does this by the way, how does this intersect with politics? How does this intersect with, unions? How does this intersect with, war? What's China going to do? And so it's just like, there are just a tremendous number of unknowns, like a very, very large number of unknowns. And I think it's just like really, really dangerous to prejudge these things. And so I'll just give, and I'll just run this as a thought experiment, so you see what you think on this, but it's like, like do AI models, are AI models themselves like defensible? Like, is there a moat on AI models? And on the one hand, you'd be like, wow, it certainly seems like there is or should be, because like if something takes, billions of dollars to build, and you need this like incredible critical mass of like compute and data, and there's only a certain number of engineers in the world that know how to do this, and they are getting paid like MBA stars. And then these companies have to deal with all these like crazy, political issues and press issues and reputational stuff and regulatory and legal, like all of that translates to like, okay, probably at the end of this, there's going to be 2 or 3 companies that are going to end up with like, 100%, I don't know, whatever, 50-50 or 30-30-30 or 90-10-1 or whatever it is market share. And then they're going to have whatever profitability they have. And it's going to be a kind of a classic oligopoly, and, or maybe, maybe one company's going to win definitively. It'll be a monopoly. And by the way, those outcomes have happened in software many times before. And so maybe that will be the outcome. The other side of it is, if you had told me 3 years ago, that in the, kind of Christmas of ChatGPT, that like within basically a year to year and a half, there would be, 5 other American companies that would have basically, exactly capable products. And then there would be another 5 companies out of China that would have exactly capable products. And then there would additionally be open source that was basically the same. I would have been like, wow, like the thing that seemed like it was black magic all of a sudden, has become like commoditized really fast. Which by the way is exactly what happened, right? Like, within a year of GPT-3 coming out, there were open source GPT-3s running on a fraction of the hardware, right? That were available for free. And then there were 5, now you've got, in the game, fully in the game, you've got Google, and you've got Anthropic, and you've got XAI, and you've got Meta, and you've got, all these other companies that are, and then DeepSeek and, Kimi and all these other Chinese companies. And so like, even at the level of like LLMs or, AI models, like you can squint and make that argument either way. By the way, same thing at the level of apps, right? It's like, one school of thought is, the apps are not a thing because like the model's just going to do everything. But another way of looking at it is no, actually adapting the model is kind of the engine into a domain involving human beings, where you need to like actually have it fit for purpose to be able to function in the medical industry or the legal industry or whatever. Or coding, no, you actually need like the application level is actually going to matter enormously, and maybe the LLMs commoditize, and maybe the value goes to the apps. And again, you can kind of squint either way on that one. And I know very smart people who are on both sides of that argument. And so my honest answer on this is I think we're in a process of discovery over time, which is, it's in the way I think about this kind of structurally is it's a complex adaptive system. The technology itself, provides one of the inputs. The legal and regulatory process, is another input. Actual individual choices made by entrepreneurs, matter a lot. The economics matter a lot. Availability of investor capital varies over time. That matters a lot. And this is a complex system, and so we actually don't know the outcomes on this yet, and we need to be open to surprises at the structural level of what happens. And of course, as a VC, this is very exciting because it means we're doing this now. We should kind of make bets along every one of these strategies and kind of see and see how this plays out. And I would just say, like, there may be like one, I don't know, there may be like one particularly brilliant, I don't know, hedge fund manager or something who has this all figured out. But I guess I would say if they exist, I haven't met them yet.
So what I'm hearing here is don't over obsess with moats at this point, because we have no idea what it'll end up being. And as much as it may feel like, okay, there's no way OpenAI will lose this lead, clearly we're seeing a lot of competition. GPT wrapper point is really great. It was such a derogatory term, I don't know, a year ago, just like you're just GPT wrapper. Now it's like the companies that are the biggest companies, fastest growing companies in the world.
Yeah, well, it's like a little bit like, I don't know. I mean, even just like with this has been the holiday. If 3 years ago was the holiday of ChatGPT, this last month or whatever has been the holiday of Claude, particularly Claude Code, right, for coding. But it's like it's pretty amazing because it's like, okay, there was Claude, which is obviously a great accomplishment, but then there's Claude Code, which is an app, right? It's a Claude wrapper. Right, it's agent harness, and then they did this amazing thing where they came out with Coworker, Cowork, and remember what they said of Cowork, which is Claude Code wrote Cowork in a week.
Yeah, a week and a half. Yep, 100%.
Well, and there's two ways of looking at that, which is like, wow, that's really impressive. I mean, obviously, that's really impressive that Claude Code was able to build Cowork in a week and a half. That's great. That's amazing. The other way to look at it is Cowork was developed in a week and a half. Like how much complexity could there be? How much of a barrier to entry can there be in something that was developed in a week and a half? And so, and then again, it's this push and this pull thing where it's like wow, it's incredibly functional, incredibly valuable, and people are like all over the world every day now are like, wow, I can't believe what I can do with this. It's like the most magical product ever. But at the same time, it took a week and a half. Right. And so every other model company, I'm sure you'd have to expect is sitting there being like, okay, obviously we need to build, an agent harness. And then obviously we need to build a Cowork, thing for regular people. And obviously, I'm not even saying I know anything, but just like, obviously they're all going to do that. Right. And so, how defensible is that? And, in 6 months, and we've seen this happen before, like is Claude Code going to get lapped the same way that, GitHub Copilot got lapped? The history in the last 3 years has been everything that looks like it's like the fundamental breakthrough gets basically replicated in the lab very quickly. Like many of the smartest people I know in the field, when I really kind of talk to them, kind of, get a couple drinks into them, they're like, yeah, they're basically, one theory is like, there really aren't any secrets among the big labs. Like the big labs kind of all have the same information and they kind of have all the same knowledge and they lab each other on a regular basis, but there's not a lot of proprietary anything at this point. And then again, evidence of that is DeepSeek came out of left field and basically was like a re-implementation of a lot of the ideas out of the American big labs and and had some original ideas of its own. But like wow, it wasn't that hard for some basically a hedge fund in China to do it. And so like how much defensibility is there? But on the other side of it, you've got wow, these big labs are now paying individual engineers like they're rock stars, and they're incredibly bright, creative people. And maybe there's a dozen nascent ideas in any one of these labs that it's actually going to be a huge breakthrough that's going to be hard to replicate. And so again, it's just like I think we just need to, I don't know, my view of myself, I need to put like a big discount on my forecasting ability on this one. Like for me, it's much less interesting to try to say, okay, as a consequence, industry structure in 5 years is going to be X. The big winner in the category is going to be company Y. The big product killer app is going to be Z. It's like I don't think I can predict that. I think a much better use of my time is being very flexible and adaptable at a time like this.
So with all this in mind, do you feel like there's something you're paying attention to more to help you decide, okay, this is where we want to place our bet? Or is the answer essentially the strategy you guys have, which is place a lot of bets? You guys raised the largest fund in history. Is that the way you win in this world?
Yeah. So for us, I mean, we obviously have a very, very deliberate strategy. One way to think about this, use the Peter Thiel. You remember the Peter Thiel formulation of, he said there's a 2x2. There's optimism and pessimism, and then there's determinate and is it indeterminate and indeterminate, right? And so and he always argued that like Silicon Valley is characterized by too much what he calls indeterminate optimism. Right, and what he always described, what he meant by that is basically, I think the way he would describe it is an indeterminate optimist who thinks the world is going to be better but can't explain why. right? Like some combination of things is going to happen to make the world be better, even if we don't know what those things are. And I think he at least historically would say like that's basically that risks at least being just like wishful thinking or delusional thinking. And what the world needs more is determinate optimists, which are people who are like, no, the world is going to be better because I'm going to do this specific thing, right? And he would classify, for example, Elon. He would sort of maybe say, VCs are indeterminate optimists, and then he would say, Elon is the determinate optimist, where it's like, no, I'm going to build the electric car, I'm going to do solar, and then I'm going to do Mars, right? And I'm going to do these very concrete things. And I think there's a lot to Peter's framework. But the way I would describe it is, I think maybe if he and I disagree on part of that, it would be, I think the indeterminate optimism is a stronger phenomenon than at least I think he's historically represented it as, and I would put myself firmly in the indeterminate optimist category, and that's the strategy that we have at A16Z, which is, and the reason for that is it's not, hopefully it's not so much wishful thinking, it's more, no, what the indeterminate optimism of venture capital or the indeterminate optimism of A16Z or Silicon Valley is it's actually very specific, which is, there are these extremely bright and capable people like Elon and many others who are founders, right? And product and kind of product creators, right? And each of those individual people is a determinate optimist. Like each of them individually has like a very strong view of what they're going to do. But the great virtue of the capitalist system, the great virtue of the American economy, the great virtue of Silicon Valley is we don't just have one of those, and we don't just have 10 of those. We have 100 and 1,000 and then 10,000 of those. And the way to optimize the outcome is to have as many of those as possible, be as good as possible, run as hard as possible. And then just the nature of the future is like we just don't know all the answers, and that's okay. And the right way to deal with that is to run as many experiments as possible and have as many smart people try to do as many interesting things as possible. And so, yeah, I would put myself firmly on the side of the indeterminate optimist.
I'm wondering if the answer to the question of what you look for now more and more is this determinate optimistic founder that has this massive ambition and is actually working on achieving it.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, look, the founders need to be determinate optimists. Like they need to have a very specific plan. Now, and look, the critique always, the critique from the founders is, oh, you VCs have it easy because like you don't actually have to commit, right? You don't actually have to like make, you don't actually have to like, you have to make the bet you lay in. You can like place multiple bets. You can operate as a portfolio. You should have a lot more sympathy for us as founders, because we only get to make the one bet. And there's truth to that. The counter argument on that is the founders get to run their companies. We don't. So we don't get to put our hand on the steering wheel. And so, the great virtue of being a determinate optimist is you actually get to single-mindedly execute against that goal. And look, in the long run, who does history remember? History remembers Henry Ford, right? Not, whoever was the, whatever the seed investor who seeded Ford Motor Company, and 10 other car companies have failed, right? And so, the determinate optimist is the founder is the founder and the company builder and the engineer. I mean, these are the people who actually do the thing and, deserve 99.9999% of the credit. But having said that, I do think there is a role for having some indeterminate optimists in the background, helping along the way and helping keep the whole cycle going.
Do you think about AGI in shifting your investment thesis, like as we approach AGI and hit AGI as an investor? How do you think about your investment thesis changing?
Yeah, so I've always kind of had a little bit of an issue. I've always kind of struggled with the concept of AGI because it at least. Well, let's put it this way. Let's define terms, which is where I kind of struggle with it. Which is there's like the prosaic, there's the prosaic definition of AGI, and then there's like the cosmic definition. And the way I would describe it as, well, let's start with the cosmic one. So the cosmic one is basically it's the singularity, right? And so AGI is the moment where you enter the singularity, which is to say that where the world fundamentally changes, and like the rules of the old world are gone. We're now operating in a new domain. And then, the kind of the full definition of singularity is like it's a world in which, human judgment is no longer really relevant because you get this self-improvement loop. The AI is improving itself, and it's sort of racing, so-called takeoff scenarios. You get this takeoff thing where the AI is improving itself, and the machines are making decisions so much faster than people, and people are just sitting there watching the machine do its thing. And I kind of described it. I don't really think I don't think we live in that world. Like whether you could call that utopian or dystopian, like I don't think we're lucky or unlucky enough to live in that world. We could debate that. We could talk about that more. But the prosaic definition of AGI that at least I think the industry participants have kind of converged on, and tell me if you agree with this, is it's when the AI can do every economically relevant task as good as a person.
The way the co-founder of Anthropic put it is like a basket of the most valuable economic tasks. So it's like 10, 15, not every single economically valuable task.
Okay, got it. Yeah, so that's maybe even a slightly reduced definition. And by the way, you're clearly getting close to that if we're not already there. And so on that one, I kind of feel like the cosmic one overstates what's going to happen, and then I kind of feel like the kind of AGI definition that you just gave, I think it kind of understates what's going to happen. It's almost too reductionist, and the reason for that is I don't think there's any reason to assume that human skill level is the cap on anything. Right, and so the way we say that is AGI always is the definition you gave, the definition I give. It's kind of it's always kind of relative in comparison to a human worker, right? And it's like I don't know, like human skill level caps out at a certain point, but that's because of the inherent like biological limitations of the human organism, right? Like human. I gave you an example. Human IQ, kind of what they call fluid intelligence, or the sort of G factor of kind of fluid intelligence. IQ, I think, tops out in humans as a species. It tops out around 160, right? Where at like 160, it's like Einstein level. Einstein, Feynman.
In terms of IQ.
Yeah. In terms of IQ. Like, you just tops out at 160. The 160 IQ people are the ones who come up with new physics. There's only a small handful of those. Generally speaking, when we run into somebody in the world who's like incredibly smart, who's like a best-selling author, or like one of the world's best, research scientists, or one of the world's best doctors, or whatever, it would be probably 140 is kind of the IQ that you're looking for there. If you're looking for like a really good lawyer, it's probably 130. If you're looking for like a really good like line manager in a business, it's probably 110. If you're looking for like an accountant, like a small business accountant who's good at doing the books for small businesses, is probably 105. Right. And so the kind of scope of like impressive human, the ability of the human organism to do intellectually impressive things, it's sort of that 110 to 160 is kind of the spectrum. And, good news is there's a lot of those people running around, but like, there's not that many at 140, 150, 160. But it's like, that's like the limitations of what can fit in here. Right. And it's like, there's no theoretical limit on where this goes if you release the limitations of human biology. Right. And so can you have you already have people running these experiments to kind of do human equivalent, kind of IQ, for existing AI model. And by the way, existing AI models right now are kind of testing around the 130, 140 level, which means they're going to get to the 160 level. And they're arguably on the mass side starting to get to the 160 level now. But like, I think we're going to have AI models relatively quickly that are going to be like 160, 180, 200, 250, 300. By the way, and I think that's great, right? Like I feel as great about that as I do about the fact that we occasionally get an Einstein, right? It's like, would the world be better off or worse off with more or fewer Einsteins? And the answer is, of course, the world would be better off with more Einsteins, and of course, the world would be better off with machines that have IQ, more IQ like Einstein or greater than Einstein. But like, I think IQ of the machines is going to exceed that of the humans. I think that's really good. And then the performance, again, it goes back to like the AI coding thing is happening. The performance against task is going to get better also. Like I think, this is where Linus Torvalds in particular is like, yeah, okay, like this thing is starting to generate better code than I can. Okay, so now we're going to have AI coders that are actually better coders than the best human coders. I think that's great. I think we're going to have AI doctors that are better than the best human doctors. I think we're going to have AI lawyers that are better than the best human lawyers, which actually is going to be very, very interesting to see, which we can talk about, which I think is also great. And so like, I don't think I think we're used to living in a world where we just don't understand how good can get because we've been capped by our own biology. And we're going to get to experience what it's like when you have the capability at your fingertips that's actually better than human in these domains. And so you see what I'm saying, which is like, I think this idea of like human equivalent is just going to be like a footnote. It's like, oh yeah, that was just on Tuesday, in 2026 is when they hit that. And it kind of didn't matter because the next question was like, okay, what do we get to do in a world in which we actually have machines that are better than that? Right. And so I think this is going to be much more of an exploratory process for actually exceeding human capability than it's going to be any sort of particular singularity moment or whatever that just happens to coincide with the human threshold. 200
IQ. Just like that frame of reference is such a mind expanding way to think about it, just how fast and how smart these things are going to get and quickly.
Well, I don't know if you have this experience. I have this experience all the time. Well, two experiences I have all the time. One is just like, I'm just like, I know I ought to be able to do this, but like, I just can't, like, it's going to take too long. I want to write this thing, or I want to like, whatever, I want to have this theory on this thing, or I have a plan or whatever. And it's just like, fuck, like, I don't have the 8 hours or by the way, the 8 weeks or the 8 years. Right. And like, I just don't know enough yet. And I'm just like, I can't do the math in my head, and my memory isn't perfect, and like I can't remember. And I read, if you have this, you get interested in something, you read 10 books, and then you're like, shit, I forgot almost everything that I just read. Like I wish I could retain it all, but I can't. It's just like you just have this. I sort of live in this kind of state of like endless frustration. I was like, like if I could just be smarter than I was, like I'd be so much better at what I do, but I'm not. So there's that. And I don't know how often you have this, but I have this on a regular basis. It's just like, because of what we do, like I know a bunch of people who I know for fucking sure are smarter than I am. And I know it because when I talk to them, I just find myself at a certain point, it's like for the first half of the conversation, I'm just taking notes the entire time. And for the second half of the conversation, I'm just like, fuck me. Like this person is just smarter than I am, and they're just outthinking me, and they're going to keep outthinking me, and I just can't. And I'm just like, all right, God damn it. Like I got to go home and I got to like have a drink because I'm just not, I'm just not, whatever that is, I'm not that. And so we're just so used to having those limitations that the idea of having machines that work for us that don't have those limitations, I think that's much more exciting than people are giving it credit for.
Oh man, I could talk to you for hours, Mark. I'm thinking to close out the conversation, I want to ask about your media diet and your product diet. You just talked about books, reading 10 books. I think you famously read constantly. I saw an interview with you where you're just like, AirPods changed my life. I'm just listening to audiobooks now all the time. So in terms of media diet, what are you reading? What are you paying attention to these days in terms of, I don't know, podcasts, newsletters, blogs, things like that, and then any books in particular?
Yeah. So what I read is basically, I would say I read basically three categories of things. So like in terms of like general media, it's basically, I sort of, I always describe it as I have almost a perfect barbell strategy, which is I read X and I read old books, right? So it's basically either like up to the minute what's happening right now, or it's like a book that was written 50 years ago that has stood the test of time. And then, where presumably there's something timeless in it. And then it's sort of everything in the middle. I'm always like much more skeptical about, and it's, in particular, it's kind of what I already said, which is, I think if you go back and you read nobody ever does this. It's actually really funny. Nobody ever does this. There's no market for it. But if you go back and you read old newspapers, and by the way, you can do this. Just read last week's newspaper, right? I'd say we're taping on Friday, so read last Friday's newspaper, right? And just go back and read it and be like, oh my God, like none of this happened, like. None of what they predicted played out the way that they said that it would. None of this turned out to actually be that like relevant or correct. Like they didn't understand, like, by the way, they had no view of what was going to happen this week. They couldn't know. And so they were making predictions and forecasts and so forth based on like not having information. But it's just like, wow, like, like none of this happened. Like, I wish I had never read this. Like, oh my God. And then, it's kind of the same thing with magazines. Like go back and read old magazines, and just like the level of the endless numbers of predictions that they make. And kind of, the problem with, newspapers, at least they're going day to day. The thing with magazines is like it's like a week or month, kind of long cycle. And so it's even, by the time an article even hits publication, it's often out of date. So I just have like a big problem with kind of everything in the middle. And so it's either of the moment or timeless. But then, yeah, you mentioned like newsletters. So the other thing, and this is maybe obvious, but I think it's probably still underrated, which is the actual practitioners in the field who are actually creating content, I think probably is still like dramatically underrated. And I think this is a huge part of like the Substack phenomenon and the newsletter phenomenon and the podcast phenomenon is like direct exposure to the people who are actually principals in the field who actually know what they're talking about is probably still dramatically underrated. And I think, again, the reason for that is like we're used to being in this mass media kind of culture in which basically everything is mediated, right? Everything got filtered through like TV interviews or like newspaper interviews or magazine interviews. And obviously now more and more, it's just, no, you actually want like smart people who are actually working on something, explaining themselves. And then you have new kinds of intermediation like podcasts that kind of open that up for people to make that possible. And so, yeah, like domain practitioners are, really great. Just to state the obvious in AI, it's obviously your stuff, but also like, Lex, the fact that like Lex Friedman can have, the world's leading or, whoever and any of you guys, there's a small handful of you guys who have access to these people. You can have the world's, kind of leading experts in the domain actually show up. And by the way, it's, it looks, the critique always is, people talk their book. Like if I'm running a startup or whatever, I'm just selling. It's like, and there's always a little bit of that. But it's also, my experience is people love to talk about what they do. And they fundamentally like want to express what they do and they want to explain it and they want people to understand it. And everybody kind of enjoys that and they get to contribute to kind of human knowledge by doing that. And they get ego gratification by doing that. And so I think there's just tremendous amounts of alpha in listening to the world's leading experts in the space who actually just like show up and talk about what they're doing. And of course, like the world is awash in that today in a way that it wasn't as recently as 10 years ago. So I do as much of that as I can too.
And there's also just this culture in tech, Silicon Valley in particular, of sharing, of not trying to keep these secrets. Everyone on LinkedIn is always like, how is this free? Like, it's just the way it works.
Yeah, it's somebody said Silicon Valley is a company town, but the company is Silicon Valley, right? And again, at the level, this goes again, there's one of these great N=1. At the level of N=1 is somebody, and I've run startups before, I've run companies before. At the level of N=1 of like running a company, that's just a giant pain in the fucking butt, like, because your secrets are walking out the door and your employees are walking out the door and the whole thing sucks. But the other side of it is you also benefit from that, right? Because you get to hire people with all these skills and experiences, right? And you're in this ecosystem that adapts, right, and channels talents and skill and knowledge and people into the new fields. And so there's kind of the push and pull of that at the level of just being an individual CEO. At the level of just being in the ecosystem, to your point, like, yeah, it's an absolutely magical phenomenon. And by the way, like, one of the for all the issues in Silicon Valley, I think AI. I did the count once. I think AI is the 9th major technology platform in the history of Silicon Valley, right? Silicon Valley is still called Silicon Valley. We haven't made silicon here in decades, right? We used to actually, it's called Silicon Valley because they used to make chips, right? They used to have the actual fabs were in Silicon Valley, and then they designed them and they made the chips, and that was wave 1 starting in the actually more like wave 3 or whatever, but like it was that was when the area was named like in the 1950s, but now we're on like wave 9, right? And the company town phenomenon where the company is the industry, like you get the indeterminate optimism. Nobody had to sit and plan and say, okay, in the 1990s, Silicon Valley is going to do the internet. In the 2000s, they're going to do the smartphone. In the 2010s, they're going to do the cloud. In the 2020s, they're going to do AI. It just the indeterminate optimism of the ecosystem, the flexibility of the ecosystem meant that the Silicon Valley could morph into all these categories. And again, maybe a testimony to indeterminate optimism.
This reminds me of the meme of how we're all just wrappers over sand. Everything we're building is just wrapper over wrapper. The
wrapper thing is hysterical. Yeah. I'm a software company now. I'm a chip wrapper, right? I'm a business application. I'm a database wrapper. Yeah, exactly. You and I we're all now sand wrappers.
Sand wrappers.
Perfect.
Okay. One more question along the media diet. I asked your partner, Ben Horowitz, what to talk to you about, the Z in A16Z, if people don't know him. And he said that you're really into movies these days. Yeah. And so I don't know, any movies you're really into these days, any movies you've absolutely loved recently?
Yeah, so the movie that blew my socks off last year, which I think is the best movie of the decade for sure, and maybe of the last like 15 years, is this movie. Unfortunately, it's one of these things that not a lot of people have seen it, but I would highly encourage it. It's called Eddington.
I've not heard of it.
Have you not heard of it? Okay, so Ed, you're going to really enjoy it. So I won't spoil too much of it. So at the surface level, the following spoils nothing. At the surface level, it's set in a small town in New Mexico called Eddington, which is a small town of about 600 people. And there's a sheriff who's played by Joaquin Phoenix, who's like an old, crusty, basically right winger. And then there's a mayor played by Pedro Pascal, who's basically a young, hip progressive. And then the movie starts, I think, in March of 2020. And so it starts when COVID first hits. And then it sort of, as it plays out over the next few months, it then intersects and it sort of extends into the summer of 2020. So, kind of the George Floyd moment, and then the protests and riots and kind of everything. So it's sort of the convergence of COVID and then all the BLM stuff. And then there's a third kind of element to it, which is there's a company which is basically a loosely disguised version of Meta, if you read the backstory of it, which is building an AI data center on the outskirts of town. So they kind of pull that in as sort of a thing that looms larger and larger over time. And then the thing it really is great at is it really shows, this is a small town in New Mexico. And so everybody in the town gets kind of fully wrapped up in all the COVID stuff, and they get fully wrapped up in all the BLM stuff, and they get fully wrapped up in all the tech anxiety stuff. But they're all experiencing it basically through the internet, right? Which is what actually happened, right? And so the reason I love the movie so much is one is it's the first movie that directly grapples with 2020, of what happened in 2020, and that just like fully engages and grapples with like all the dynamics that were playing out in the country. But the other reason is it's the first movie that does a really good job of showing what it was like, especially in that era, to live in a world in which there were things happening in the real world and people were kind of experiencing events online like in a way that was like very central in their lives, right? And so it does like a really good job of pulling in like smartphones and social media in a way that movies really struggle with, and then the whole thing comes together in an incredibly entertaining way. And I won't even say I completely agree with the movie or whatever, and I think the director of the movie and I would probably disagree about a lot, but he really tries hard to like really grapple with like what it is actually like to live like a human being in the 2020s in America, in a way that I think many other filmmakers who are very talented have just been very scared of touching. And this guy, for some reason, he's just like, yeah, I'm just going to find all the third rails and I'm just going to like fucking grab them.
I can see why that's your favorite movie.
It's great. It's great. It's great. Everybody should see it.
Oh, man. Okay, final question. I want to ask about your product diet. Are there any products you use that maybe are less known that you love that you want to recommend? You can, mention products to your investors and if you use them constantly.
I mean, we have so many that it's really hard to, I always feel it's like, who's your favorite children. So it's really hard to pull out specific ones. But I'll talk about a few. I'll just observation. So one is my 10-year-old. My 10-year-old right now is 100% obsessed with Replit. And by the way, it was not from me. Do you have kids?
I do. I have one 2.5-year-old.
2.5. Okay, so you haven't run into what I'm running into now, which is whatever it is you do is not cool. Right? Like it's 2.5. Whatever daddy does is like the coolest thing in the fucking world. I can tell you by the time he's 10, whatever you do is like deeply uncool. Right. And I'm highly aware of that. And so like if I mention, oh yeah, we work on XYZ, he's like, okay. But when he discovers something, then it's cool. Or when his friends tell him about it, it's cool. And so he through no interference on my part, discovered Replit about 3 months ago and discovered vibe coding and is like completely obsessed with vibe coding games and all kinds of things, and like literally will sit and do it for hours. And so I'm seeing that phenomenon play out, which is super fun. That's one. Two is I am just completely in love with all the AI voice stuff. I think it's just absolutely amazing, hysterical. My favorite party trick at dinner parties now is to pull out Grok with Bad Rudy, which is, if you've seen, it's a foul-mouthed raccoon avatar on the in the Elon's Grok app. So I think that's super fun. We have this company Sesame that had, they went viral last year for this, these just incredibly like, intimate, emotional, kind of voice experiences. So I think the voice stuff is fantastic. I'm also super fascinated by all the voice input stuff. And so, Limitless Suite, Limitless recently, company recently sold, but I think like the pendants, the wearables, like all that stuff is going to be big. The meta glasses. I think there's going to be a whole wearables revolution here. I love the voice input stuff. I have this app there's this app on my phone now called WhisperFlow, which is voice transcription, which works like staggeringly well. It's like incredible. It's like a voice transcription function, but you can actually talk to the AI model while you're doing voice transcription. So you can it kind of understands when you're telling it, no, I want bullet points over there and I want this and that. And it understands that you're not telling it to type in the words, I want bullet points. It just actually understands that you want bullet points. And so like, that's a great example of a super useful thing. And so I think the voice mode stuff is going to be really great.
Subscribers of my newsletter get a year free of Replit and WhisperFlow. So there we go. What's the most memorable thing your son built with Replit?
Oh, well, so he's gotten super into Star Trek, and so far it's been he's writing like Star Trek simulators. So like all the by Next Generation they actually had
Next Generation. Okay, I was going to ask which.
Well, we like them all. We watched the new Starfleet Academy last night, which actually is quite good. But we watched the original. We watched them all. But it was in Next Generation where they actually developed an actual design language for the computers. Because if you watch the original series, they just had like basically knobs with lights, and they didn't really they just like were like fucking around on set and trying to pretend they were doing it. But by Next Generation, they actually had a UI design language. And so one of the fun things you can do vibe coding is you can say, give me a Star Trek Next Generation, user interface for, whatever, this, that, or whatever. And it actually uses they call it, this, I'm a nerd out, they call it LCARS design language. And it'll actually build you like Star Trek Next Generation bridge consoles using that design language, but, with your choice of like a Star Trek game, for example. And so he's going crazy for that kind of thing.
That sounds extremely delightful. You guys should open source or release that. Mark, like I said, I could talk to you for hours. You got things to do. Anything you want to leave listeners with before we wrap up? Anything you want to double down on or just leave listeners with?
Yeah, so a couple things. So one is we got super lucky last week. Packy McCormick wrote the best piece ever written about us, actually, which he released. And so it's the best explanation of what we do and how we think. And so I would definitely recommend that. And then, we're putting a lot, we have a, great team of folks now. We're putting a lot of effort ourselves into video and content. And so I definitely recommend our YouTube channel, which I think has a lot of great stuff and is going to be very exciting in the next year.
Awesome. We'll link to that. I think it's just youtube.com/A16Z, something like that. And you guys have great stuff. Marc, thank you so much for being here.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. If you found this valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find the podcast. You can find all past episodes or learn more about the show at lennyspodcast.com. See you in the next episode.
Regardless of whether or not you're hiring, you should always be keeping a pulse on the market. That is the most important thing. And I think that should be the case for both candidates and, folks that are hiring. Like, you never want to put yourself in a position where you have no idea what good looks like, whether that's from a company standpoint or from a candidate standpoint. So both parties should always be having a good understanding of which companies are thriving, which individuals are building great things and are well-known commodities in their organizations and get great references. Oftentimes, I, encourage founders to simply chat with what good looks like and get a really good sense of kind of what benchmark candidate profiles could be. And who knows where that person will be in a year or what have you, but staying really, really close to really great people and using them from an advising capacity or getting them ingrained in some type of involvement in the product prior to actually having that specific need, I think is really important.
Welcome to Lenny's podcast. I'm Lenny, and my goal here is to help you get better at the craft of building and growing products. Today, my guest is Lauren Ipsen. One of the most important skills for founders and senior product leaders to develop is the ability to hire great people. You won't be able to build the best company or the best product if you can't hire the best people. And Lauren is one of the most experienced and successful people in the world when it comes to hiring product leaders. She's placed over 80 senior product leaders across tech companies and has worked with some of the biggest companies out there. When I asked a bunch of really smart product leaders who their favorite product recruiter was, Lauren's name came up a ton. In our conversation, we get super tactical about what founders need to do to find the best product talent, what product managers should be doing during their career to give themselves the most opportunity, and we also touch on what recruiters themselves often get wrong when trying to attract great talent. This episode is rich with actionable advice for basically everyone, and I am really excited to bring it to you. With that, I bring you Lauren, thank you for being here. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here.
I've been meaning to do an episode on product hiring and recruiting product people for a while. And when I asked a bunch of smart friends, who should I have on to talk about this stuff, your name came up a bunch. And so I'm really happy that we're finally doing this.
Me too. Absolutely. I'm grateful that you asked.
So to help listeners get a sense of just your background and kind of the journey you've been on to get to where you are now, can you just spend maybe just a minute kind of talking through the wonderful things you've done in your career and what you're doing now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started my career in broadcast. I originally thought that I wanted to be on the news and quickly realized I didn't necessarily want to be the face of sadness. There's a ton of that happening in the world. So made a pivot pretty early on and thought, where could I use the communication skills that I've been working so hard on and do something that's impactful in a big way, but maybe just with a little bit of a different angle, and stumbled across executive search. Exec search is not really something that people major in college by any means or think they're going to end up doing. So it was something I found fascinating. I had applied to all of these different companies like Twitter and Snap and Pinterest, hadn't heard back from any of them, was a name in the resumes, and thought, how cool would it be if I could work with all of them and have an opportunity to play a part from a different lens. So got into exec search, was really focused early on consumer mobile build-outs, was doing a lot of work with Twitter and Reddit and TaskRabbit and Nextdoor, Postmates, you name it. And that was probably 85% of the work I was doing. And then as on the agency side, 15% was obscure, autonomous helicopters selling into the Department of Defense, and then retail and robotics. And it was all very fascinating. But for me, who has wicked bad ADD, it was amazing to be able to be so stimulated by so many different industries and feel like I couldn't really master this, So long story short, had an awesome career at Diversa Partners, which is a boutique executive search firm, and thought I was going to be there potentially forever. Was tapped by a awesome individual, Abe Shafi, who was founding a company. I had been doing a lot of work for them. They were a client of mine at the time, placed a couple of great hires, and they said, we're either going to kick off a head of talent search with you or you can come over and join us. So I was the first recruiting hire over there, built out the talent function in its entirety. I definitely think there was a part of me that, I loved the operating experience, learned a ton, worked side by side some amazing people, but was really missing working with founders and lots of them and keeping a pulse on the market. So General Catalyst tapped me most recently and been working here for the past couple months, and it's been great thus far. And I'm specializing in our consumer and crypto investments.
Awesome. The fact that you're at GC now makes me think about another recruiter that I know who's awesome, Austin Brezendine. And it's interesting that a lot of the best recruiters seem to be heading to VC funds. And I'm curious why that is happening. Is it like a comp thing? Is it other things that are pulling everyone away into funds?
It's a great question. It's definitely not a comp thing. I'll say that. I think it could be a stability of life thing. Search is incredibly volatile and you have to hustle so hard. And as soon as you have 3 wins, you've got 4 more things to execute on. And so there's aspects of it that can be tough, especially in a market like right now, where you really do have to chase business and you can't be selective about what you take on. So you could be pitching things that maybe you don't necessarily believe in its entirety or what have you. So I think that's one component. In-house is obviously difficult right now as well for talent leaders. It's really scary to take a bet on one single company right now and know what it's going to look like 6 months from now. And so I think those things combined might be the reason for an influx in folks leaning more towards venture. And I think it's just timeliness.
Got it. That makes sense. The downside is it's hard for people to find awesome recruiters because once you're in a fund, you're just going to help those startups. And so we're going to talk later about just how do people find awesome recruiters? What do you look for? But there's roughly 3 things I want to spend our time chatting through today. One is for founders and hiring managers, just how to find the best talent and what they could do to be successful finding the best talent. 2 is for product leaders and PMs, how to give themselves the most opportunity from the flip side. And then 3rd is just for recruiters. What do they often do wrong? How do they miss out on the best product talent? Does that sound good?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, cool. So on the hiring front, just diving in. Say you're a founder, you're someone really early at a company, and maybe you've got a couple PMs and you're starting to think about, we need to hire a really senior product leader, our first senior product leader.
Sure.
What do you find is often the biggest mistake that founders make when they're trying to hire their first senior product leader?
I think especially for founders that haven't hired for this caliber of talent in the past, it's really easy to be distracted by shiny objects and look at huge names. You want to find the CPOs of Google and YouTube or what have you, because that seems like it would be such an incredible opportunity for brand recognition. And to an extent, it is. But the fact of the matter is, oftentimes those individuals are pretty far from the work and have a great team of executors that they've put into place that are actually the ones that are in the weeds. And so I think that's the biggest mistake I see people make, especially on, the hiring front where they have limited resources and maybe they're an early stage company, and trying so hard to bring in big names is not always the best way to go about it, because the fact of the matter is they need to go then hire a team. So I think looking for someone that's a little closer to the work, maybe someone that can step up into that type of role and do so in a way where some days they might actually be operating like a PM, and then other days they might be able to build from a leadership perspective. Like, that's more of the DNA that people should be targeting.
Do you think the source of the issue with that going wrong, that they no longer can do that work as well because they've been shielded away from the tactical day-to-day? Or is it that they're not as hungry as they used to be and they're just like, I'm a YouTube 10-year super success. I don't need to prove myself anymore, and they're just not as hungry, or something else?
I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say that all senior leaders aren't hungry. I think that there's some folks that really lean into the work in a different way and miss that, and often go to startups because they crave building. So it's not necessarily that, but I do tend to lean towards folks that have a chip on their shoulder or have something to prove and want to build a name for themselves. All of that to say, there's a reason that a lot of those people got to where they are. And some of the best talent are some of the senior folks, but just maybe not necessarily the best talent for where this company is today, right? It could be great for 10 years down the road, but the past 5 years of that individual's career could have been far more focused on camaraderie, team building, operational components, performance reviews, and then aspects of product vision, which just might not be the innovative A/B testing type of profile that you typically look for in these pre-IPO companies.
Got it. I imagine there are stories that you can't share about people you've placed like that have not worked out. If you can share one, that'd be awesome. But maybe a side question is the general advice: just don't assume someone that's been successful at a big company with a fancy background is going to be great. Sometimes they work out, but not always. Is that kind of takeaway?
Yeah, I would say the general advice is who is going to be best for this specific role at this specific time, not necessarily who is the best talent in the world or in the market. Those are two very, very different questions to ask. And I think, early on in my recruiting career, I was often just trying to recruit these whales of executives to try and prove myself and say, like, I got this person to entertain this opportunity. How sick is that? But naturally, that's not necessarily the person that actually can move the needle. And so you need to think very specifically. Just because this is the best talent, that doesn't necessarily mean they're the best talent for this role today.
So to double down on that, say you're hiring and you're going to start hiring a senior product leader. What is it that you suggest founders nail down and iron out when they're kicking off the hiring process, either on their own or with a recruiter? Like, in the job description, what else do they have to get right to find the right person?
It's a number of things. Like, product leaders can come in a lot of different flavors. And so I think it's trying to determine where this person should major and minor, where they should spike. Is this someone that's going to really lean into the design efforts? Is it someone that, actually kind of needs to just operate like a very senior PM and continue to build out a team? Is this someone that really should be focused on product vision for the long haul and then thinking more holistically about how to build the rest of the team? There's so many different ways in which you can hire for a product leader. So I think it's trying to work a little bit backwards and think about, what is the actual outcome that we're trying to solve for with this hire? Or are we just hiring ahead of product because we feel like we need to hire ahead of product? Like, that's so often what I see is, the board's telling me we need to hire a head of product. And, I don't necessarily think that we do, or I'm not exactly sure what we need in this role. And so whenever you're starting a search in that regard, it's kind of doomed from inception. So you need to get incredibly granular on the front end around what is this person going to be coming in to do? What's their mandate? And, if we think about someone that's just absolutely hitting it out of the park and crushing it, what does that look like? So I think just trying to be really specific on the front end.
I love that last piece. Just what does success really look like for this person? On the first piece, that's exactly the same advice I give founders when they're looking for a PM is like, what do you concretely need them to do day to day? Not like we need someone to help us with product. And that often helps illuminate, okay, I see. We need someone to help us ship more consistently. We need someone to help us hire engineers. Like, just make a list. Like, what are they going to do in the first month or 2 or 3?
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are the most important things. Like the 90-day plan is something that's overused, but so necessary. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. So that component, and then, okay, a year from now, what should this person be doing? 2 years from now, do we want them to grow up into a CPO role? Do we think about that in a different way? How are we thinking about the product direction today, 12 months from now, 18 months from now, through IPO? Like, I think it's really difficult to think about things that way. And so often you're thinking about the task in front of you and just trying to iterate quickly. But like, that is the type of thought process that needs to be happening from the CEOs and founders.
Are there archetypes of PMs if you just like bucket, like here's the 3 maybe most common types of product leaders that founders hire? Because there's like an infinite list of skills and things they could do. But just to make it even simpler, like here's probably one of these 3 you're looking for. Do you have something like that in your head?
Yeah, there's platform product leaders or folks that are kind of more indexed on the infrastructure components. There's folks that are typically focused on like core product or consumer product if it's on the consumer side of things. And then you'll have folks that are really indexed, and that can include like UX individuals, design folks. And then there's also typically specialists. So individuals that are really hyper-focused on growth or monetization or what have you. Those are the 3 buckets that I would say I see most often.
Do you feel like founders sometimes pick one of the wrong buckets and that's a common mistake? Or is it generally it's the wrong bucket, but then maybe it's not the right spikes of skills within that bucket?
Well, it's kind of twofold. I think sometimes people just bring in a head of product to do everything. So that's probably not the best way to go about things. Like, I think that ends up being a unicorn, which you hear often in the search world, and it becomes really difficult to hone in on what good looks like. And so, I think, again, it just comes back to like having a clear org chart on the front end and determining, are we hiring someone specifically to build out our walled garden ads approach? Or are we hiring someone to run product marketing? Or are we hiring someone to help from a product perspective to build a better core user experience? Like, those are all very, very, very different roles. And if you bring in one person to try and do it all, the fact of the matter is they're going to have to bring in some key lieutenants to help them. So is that something you want to do? Or are you more focused on bringing in someone imminently to help on the ad side of things? And then we can find that head of product to help them out down the road. Like, that's kind of the way in which I would architect it and think about it, is what's most imminent and what do you actually need to hire for today, as opposed to just hiring for the sake of hiring and bringing in that leader.
And part of the discussion there is maybe they grow up into this head of product long term, maybe not. Maybe we just need someone to ship the ads platform. Mm-hmm. Right?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
You mentioned this title of head of product. There's also VP of product, CPO. There's all these titles, and I feel like people sometimes use them interchangeably, don't know which one to use when they're putting out a job description. Do you have any kind of heuristic rule of thumb of just here's how to think about when to use each of these titles, or is it not even a big deal for, say, a founder hiring their first senior product leader?
It's a great question, and it definitely leads to confusion across the board, because I'll have candidates come to me and they'll say, I'm only looking for a CPO role, when I'm working with a startup where maybe on the venture side of things, we've actually advised that startup to not hire C-level executives at this point. And so that naturally could eliminate a candidate that could be amazing for the role. Similarly, people could feel that way if, it's a VP of product role, but that in their mind is the most senior product leader within the organization, running everything from end to end, who they intend to be the CPO down the road. but are not in a position where they're ready to hire C-level execs. So it's tough, and it really depends on the organization and the way in which they're thinking about org charts and leveling. A lot of startups at this point are almost allergic to C titles or VP titles, or are just more title agnostic than I've seen in the past. So you see a lot more of these head ofs, and that is sector leaders up until probably C plus or D stage. And then you get to D and E, and you'll see more of the VP, director, CPO type. And I think that is like the way that people should be thinking about it is, if I'm joining a company very, very early days and it's called head of engineering, that is intended to be the most senior engineering leader within the organization. The fact of the matter, though, is there's good reason sometimes why they're not throwing out that C title. And could this person be layered down the road? Potentially, because maybe the talent they need right now is different than, just as we had spoken to earlier, is different than the talent that they might need from a massive CPO in 2.5 years. And so I think that rubs people the wrong way, because they want a bit of a promise that things are going to, if they join at this stage, that they'll be in it for the long haul and be that chief product officer that takes a company through an IPO. But companies are so dynamic and things change so quickly. So, I guess a long-winded way of me saying, like, there's different breadth and depth to each role. But I think for the most part, unless it's a very siloed company with multiple different VPs, if you're coming into a company and they say, this is the head of product, the VP of product, or the CPO, that all means the same thing dependent on the stage for the most part.
And the other takeaway there, which is awesome, is if you're an early stage startup, probably just start with head of product. Keep it simple.
Yeah.
Don't overpromise. Everyone understands.
Yeah, because the last thing you want to do is have to demote someone. But, once you get to a place of having C-level executives, like, that's not going to do any good. But maybe you start as a head of product, and then as the company continues to grow, you lean into the growth side of things more. And so you become that head of growth or an SVP of growth. Like, things iterate and change, but you just never know, and you can't predict the outcome of a company on the front end. So
a lot of people listening to this probably aren't hiring senior product leaders right now, but plan to and will in the future. And so I wanted to ask, what should founders do when they know they will hire a head of product, say in the next year, that could set them up for success down the road? What should they be doing ahead of time?
Regardless of whether or not you're hiring, you should always be keeping a pulse on the market. That is the most important thing. And I think that should be the case for both candidates and, folks that are hiring. Like, you never want to put yourself in a position where you have no idea what good looks like, whether that's from a company standpoint or from a candidate standpoint. So both parties should always be having a good understanding of which companies are thriving, which individuals are building great things and are well-known commodities in their organizations and get great references. Oftentimes, I, encourage founders to simply chat with what good looks like and get a really good sense of kind of what benchmark candidate profiles could be. And who knows where that person will be in a year or what have you, but staying really, really close to really great people and using them from an advising capacity or getting them ingrained in some type of involvement in the product prior to actually having that specific need, I think is really important.
That sounds awesome. And it makes sense. How do you, as a founder, do some of that? Do you just kind of ask folks like, hey, who are some of the best product leaders? I just want to chat with them, not hiring, just want to kind of meet people who are awesome. Is that the behavior you suggest, or is there something else you can do?
That's a great way to go about it. And by simply saying, no agenda, I'm not trying to hire you tomorrow. I just want to know great people. And to be totally honest, people feel flattered by that typically. Most of the time, if you've been referred to someone and heard nothing but great things about them and you really don't have an agenda other than wanting to pick their brain, people are like, well, this is different from the day-to-day. This is like fulfilling. And people want to pour their knowledge, especially into companies that they believe in. So I think more often than not, you'll find that not just product leaders, but executives across the board are actually really inclined to do so and want to help out because it's a little bit different from the day-to-day monotony of their work life.
So the advice is keep track of companies who are killing it, who you might be able to kind of poach from in the future, and keep a list and keep warm contact with folks that are awesome. It reminds me of a founder that are basically all founders who are really good at hiring and how far ahead they plant seeds and how they just kind of play the long game with the best people they meet. And they just kind of keep the conversation going until they finally convince them to join like a year or two later. You find out the same thing?
1,000,000%. Yeah. When I was on the executive recruiting side of things at Diversa, the VP of engineering candidate that we ultimately landed, it was a 7-month game of courtship. And let's bring him in to help out from an advising capacity. Let's ask him how he would think about structuring this org. Let's talk to him about the best talent that he would recommend that we're spending time with. No question that's invasive, but more so just collaborative and exciting. And you'll find that the founder and that leader will build a different level of rapport and trust by not going through a formal interview process and having it feel transactional. And then with that, magic can happen and you can land incredible people.
This all sounds like a lot of work and a lot of time. Do you have guidance on how long it should take to find, like for a early stage startup, say Series A or B, to like find someone awesome, and or how much time founders should spend a week, just best practice on hiring for someone like this?
I mean, I think if you're going to search, so if you're looking for this individual, it's really so case to case. Like there's searches that I've been in that I call 3 people. I know they're amazing for this. I tell the founder and CEO, these are the 3 people you should chat with, hire one of them. And it's that easy. There's others where it's a lot of trying to figure out what the person's actually looking for. If there's, some they hit it off from an emotional standpoint. There's so many different things that come with it. I would say from a timing perspective, like it's not a hard number. It's more of just put yourself in the room with great people. If you have a tremendous amount of respect for someone, continue to harvest that relationship and ask what good looks like. Find excuses to continue to touch base with people that are important in your network. If you remembered that they mentioned that they were going to some event and you think that you might want to hire them down the road, in a non-creepy way, show up to that event. Like these are things that I'm constantly doing, and I think that founders can do a better job of, but just make yourself known and relevant. And then when you reach out and timing is right, it won't feel so obscure or so transactional.
That reminds me of a time at Airbnb where we had these meetups for engineers every month or so, or it was like it was a tech talk. And then all the engineers get a target engineer that is coming to event. They get their profile and their picture, and their job is to make sure they have a great time and try to convince them to join someday.
Oh my God. But it's so real. It's similar to college trips where you're trying to get recruited for a sport, and you have to ensure that you're just continuing to give people the best experience possible and staying top of mind for people.
Yeah, but I could see being creepy. They have no idea there's this person assigned to them, but it works. It worked great. It was a great tactic.
That's awesome.
I want to come back to a question that I asked, but I feel like you'll have an actual more concrete answer to the specific piece of just what's your guidance per week, how much time you should be spending on hiring broadly, and specifically like heads of product, if that's any different. Do you have any just like advice? Because I imagine it's always spend more time than you think. It's going to take a lot of time.
Yeah, it's definitely spend more time than you think. If you are in an actual search, then you should devote all of your time to it. I know that sucks to hear, but like you should be really carving out concrete time. The thing that's tough though is you could spend, I guess what I was trying to say is you could spend 1 hour on something, or you could spend 10 hours on it, but it's more so around, are you doing things to be impactful during that period of time? Like, are you actually doing things that are going to move the needle? Are you just blindly reaching out to people on LinkedIn? Because that's not going to be the way in which you're going to find the best of the best. Some of the greatest talent, they're not even on LinkedIn. And so I think it's building a really strong network in advance. And then once you actually get to a place where you need to hire that person, like calling all of those amazing people that you've built relationships with and saying, now tell me who your favorite person is and who the best person you've ever worked with is. And could you put me on a thread with them? Like, how are you going to differentiate yourself from the rest of the market? So it's less, in my mind, like a quantitative number of hours and more of how are you doing things differently than the rest of the market?
I want to pull in this thread. Okay, so you're spending 1 hour versus 10 hours, and your point about how you could spend 1 hour and get as much done maybe in those 10 hours. What sorts of behaviors and actions should folks take to make use of, say, that 1 hour in hiring? Like, how do you not waste your time?
I mean, I would say I've got probably 5 of my all-time favorite product leaders in the world that I tap whenever I'm kicking off a search. And they know that whenever life brings them to an opportunity where they are going to start looking or want to lean into board opportunities, that I'm going to set them up and shout their name from the rooftops. So oftentimes they're willing to point me in the right direction of great people, make those introductions, what have you. And I'm going to know simply because of how great they are that they would never put me in touch with someone that wasn't equally as qualified. So that, I think, because the quality is there, so I'm not just blindly guessing on quantity, spending a ton of time on LinkedIn and then having to call unknown entities and ask for back channel references when they also might not even feel comfortable sharing the dirt. So it comes back to rapport and people that you have around you that you can trust and tap into, and ensuring that you're spending the time in the right areas.
Got it. Yeah, so tapping your network makes a lot of sense. If you don't have that yet, I guess, is it worth spending time on LinkedIn, just cold messaging people as a founder? And any tips there for just cold outreach that you think work for a founder doing it versus you who are a professional at it?
I do think it is worth that time. If you see someone that looks amazing, hell yeah, reach out to them. Spend time with them. Why not? And oftentimes, again, people are excited to see, oh, the CEO and founder wants to pick my brain. It doesn't look like they're coming at me to try and recruit me, but rather just to have an open-ended conversation, for sure. And you can definitely sense that type of interaction and feel comfortable with it. Whereas sometimes the walls immediately go up when someone senses that they're trying to get poached. And so, it's I think something that's worth them doing for sure. It's just, if you are going to look for a key executive and are on a time crunch, I don't necessarily think the best use of your time is blindly reaching out to executives when you don't necessarily have the expertise in knowing which companies were thriving during that period of time, which organizations were great and which were a little bit weaker within companies. Like, all of those things are just the inner workings of the recruiting atmosphere and technology. And I think, like, tapping people, if you don't have the network, talk to a great recruiter or just spend some time kind of doing some research on who's great. You can ask investors or board members in your companies as to who you should be targeting. So there's always got to be 1 or 2 people that can at least point you to another 3 or 4.
That reminds me of a tactic Gokul shared on this podcast about one of his best tricks is you think of, if you're hiring salespeople, instead of looking for who are just the best salespeople, you look for the company that is known for being really good at sales. And then you go find people there and try to poach their lieutenant types, not like maybe necessarily their head of sales. Do you think that's a good move?
Yes and no.
Oh.
Yes and no, because I think if the organization is incredibly good at sales, then the majority of the folks are probably amazing, but you always have weak links. And just because someone has a brand on their resume at the right time, I think oftentimes CEOs and founders will do this thing where they kind of overgeneralize. Well, Amazon's Prime team at this time was amazing or something like that. It's like, they definitely could have been, but just as any other company, there's going to be people that are breakout, top 1% type individuals, and then other individuals that get to ride the wave and reap the benefits of being at the right place at the right time. And I think that's a good starting place, but then also spending time getting a little bit deeper on who the best people are within that organization. But yeah, we always start with market mapping. So determining who the best companies are within a specific area. And then I just encourage everyone to take that a layer deeper.
Got it. It just comes back to your previous piece of advice. Don't assume someone that has an awesome logo is going to be great, but sometimes they are. There's a question I should have asked you at the beginning that I'm going to ask now. How many folks have you placed? How many companies have you worked with? And then also, is there a story of just like your favorite person that you've placed / company you've helped hire that comes to mind?
Yeah. So both great questions. I've placed probably 85 executives over the course of my career, and lots of entry-level employees when I was in-house, and also some great key leaders. Yeah, probably 85 searches that I've opened and closed. So that's been incredibly fulfilling work. It's also fun too on the exec side of things, because you hire the VP of engineering at Postmates and you see firsthand the product change. You watch those types of things happen before your eyes, it's fulfilling stuff. It's really cool.
Delivery gets there faster too.
Yeah, exactly. So that's really fun. Favorite placement of all time has got to be the VP of engineering that I placed at IRL, which is to be completely honest, a big reason that I joined that company. Alex Strand is his name, and he is just the most incredible, atypical, high emotional, intelligent engineering leader, still super technical, but has managed teams in the hundreds, built out Amazon Prime Day, then went on to build the core messaging platform at Snapchat. Called him and he was like, why would I ever leave? There's a ton of financial incentive and a team that I've built that all loves me. And we got him to ultimately make a move in 2 weeks, which is just kind of unheard of. Although it ended up being like a 7-month push for a start date. But that was a big reason why I went and joined IRL, was to work side by side him and help build out his team and learn to get more deep on the technical side of things. Because oftentimes on the executive level, as mentioned before, can be sometimes more of that people management type role. And so he just felt like this unique hybrid of an individual. And yeah, you close searches and you cross your fingers and hope for the best and feel very good about it. But he was one where I had all the confidence in the world that I could not have done better. I just felt so great about that. So that was
I don't know how much more confidence you can instill in a candidate joining a company than the recruiter also then joining the company.
Yeah, I did say that to him. I kept saying, and if I were to go in-house, I swear this is probably the company I would do it for. And then about 4 weeks after he signed, I texted him and I said, well, you'll never guess.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing. What a stamp of confidence.
Yeah. And a full circle life moment. I sent him a box of cookies. He sent it back and said, your turn.
And is he still there at IRL? Awesome.
Yes.
I want to shift a little bit to kind of flip to the product person's perspective and talk about how do you be successful as a product leader in finding new opportunities and giving yourself opportunities in the space. And so maybe a first question is just generally, what should product leaders and PMs focus on to give themselves the most opportunity in their career?
I think breadth is incredibly important. It's so critical, especially if someone has an end goal of wanting to step into a product leadership role, to have been able to have touched lots of different components as opposed to specializing in one specific thing. So I would say that's very important, to be able to make sure that you're maximizing opportunities for yourself down the road. And then, as mentioned before, just always keeping a pulse on the market, regardless of how happy you are in your current company, regardless of what the project is that you're so incredibly excited about that isn't going to conclude until Q1 of next year. It's just so important that you always know the companies that are doing great things and keep those windows open for people, because you never know what the next 12 months hold. And you want to be in a position where you're never running out the door looking for what's next, but rather, being able to be super selective about the things that you have in front of you. And that comes with time and network building and relationship building over years, honestly.
And when you say breadth, are you saying things like work on the platform team for a bit, work on the user-facing team, maybe the internal tools team, like different types of product or something else?
Exactly that. Yeah. I think there's people that probably want to just be a specialist in growth, or want to get super deep on ads. And if that's the case, then by all means do so. And I think there's something to be said about that as well, because those types of skill sets will be needed. But if you're looking to diversify your skill set, continue to grow from a career trajectory perspective, and think about potentially being in a head of product type role, I think it's really important that you touch all aspects of that.
I'm really happy to hear that, because that's exactly the advice I give new PMs, that a variety of experience is one of the most powerful things you can do, because you also just become a better PM because you can see how different types of products are built and how different types of teams operate, and it just makes you better.
Yes. Variety of experience. I think taking a bet on doing something more entrepreneurial, starting something, and then also joining things that are a little bit later and more established to get best practices. Like I think diversifying your skill set within an organization, but also diversifying the work in which you're doing and the companies that you're spending time with is awesome.
Yeah. So on that, something I'm always weary of is folks jumping around between all the fancy companies to get a bunch of logos on the resume. Oh, I worked at Snap and Facebook and Netflix. And I feel like you're just like building a resume and then your life flies by. And you forget that you should enjoy the things you're doing and work on things that are fulfilling and optimize for not a great resume. And curious your thoughts on just how often you think you should move from company to company. One, to optimize for opportunities in the future, or just like generally, do you recommend people try to move around or go deeper at their company? Like, there's a bunch of questions there, but take it wherever you want to go.
Yeah. Okay, sounds good. I think it's an interesting one because logo collecting is never something that you want to be known for. And the first thing you're taught, like entry-level recruiting 101, is recognize patterns of candidates that jump from place to place and don't give opportunities a full chance. So you're spot on. Like, that is definitely not something you want to be known for if you're a prospect. There's also something to be said about staying somewhere too long, though. And I will say that I think sometimes you find people that are almost loyal to a fault, and companies have tanked and all executives have left and the writing's on the wall, and they're holding on to the fact that they were hired by a really good guy or gal and they want to make it work because they care about the human being. And I think sometimes in your career, you do have to be a little bit more selfish and think about what's going to be best for you in the long haul. And so maybe that is still keeping your head down and working hard while also being thoughtful about other things that are out there, and not saying hard no's to opportunities that knock on your door. So it's kind of, it's one where I would say it's an art and a science, because you have to be thoughtful about taking on new things and knowing when it's worth taking a bet on yourself. But also you can't run as soon as things get hard because that is recognized. And if there's a riff or an internal dispute or a new leader brought in, and that is so quick as to make you run for the fences, that's not something that people look for, because startup world is hard. Tech is hard. Look at the crypto world right now. Like, things are incredibly volatile and difficult, and you want to be able to bring people in that are going to hang with you through the highs and lows. We're always looking to see where people moved the needle, especially on the product side, where their fingerprints were, what they can actually point to that they did and, are proud of during their time there. And so if all that they can say that they did was onboarded and moved on, then it doesn't matter where you were, but it's not going to be something that I can at least stand on to cheer you on.
I really like that. A lot of this comes down to what impact have you made. And I was going to touch on that. And your point is, one kind of heuristic for how long to stay at a place at the minimum is like have some meaningful impact you can point to that you led. That sound right?
Yeah, exactly. And have that meaningful impact be something that others can speak to. Mm-hmm. I think that's huge. If you built something within the organization that you're proud of, but no one knows about it, then that's more difficult to have as your stamp of approval for what you were able to accomplish there. But if you did something that cross-functional leaders were speaking to, that your team all sings the praises of, then that is something that you can put a feather in the cap and say, okay, I left this place better than I found it. And that's the reason that I have decided to move forward.
And I imagine part of that is for reference checks. People are going to check to see if you actually were successful.
All the time.
Yeah.
Yep. Whether you are exploratory, opportunistic, not looking at all, people are constantly calling each other. And the world of tech is so, so, so small. And no matter how fired up you were leaving a company or what went sideways, it is so critical that you try to leave the place better than you found it and do so as seamlessly as possible, because you want people to have nothing but positive to say. And oftentimes the thing that I always find too is if I call 10 people that were a part of the same organization as someone during a given period of time and they can't speak to anything they did, in that case, it's no news is not necessarily good news. You want to have an impact. You want to be able to say, I did X, Y, and Z. I'm super proud of this. And the reason I moved on is because, I did what I came in to accomplish.
It's a little bit innately tricky for product leaders. I imagine you run into this, that sometimes you have to upset people as a product leader to get stuff done that needs to get done. And maybe they disagree. And then later it's like, okay, I see what you did. Is that true? Do you deal with that? Or is it generally like, oh yeah, the great people everyone knows, like 100% of people will say they're awesome?
It's a really good question. I think there's a way to navigate conflict without rubbing people the wrong way so that they'll, say negative things. There's a way to be an impactful product leader and disagree and make change. And maybe your engineering leader and design leader and marketing leader completely disagree with the direction in which you're going. But because you have all of the data to support it, and because you have gone about things in a way that feels very fact first and less emotional, it's really difficult for them to then point to why they disliked this person.
Yeah, this is interesting. So say you make those 10 calls. In your experience, the leaders you want to hire, are you finding 10 out of 10 are generally like, yes, this person's amazing, you should hire them?
There's ones that are slam dunks and no one has any negative to say. That's incredibly rare. More often you find some people like to just have something negative to say just to have something negative to say. I also take all of my back channels with a grain of salt. Maybe the person I'm calling to back channel this person with, I also haven't back channeled, right? So every single thing that you hear, you just make note of and then move on and think more holistically about. But I think typically what I would say is the glaring no's are very obvious. People that are polarizing individuals or have done wrong within an organization or made bad calls across the board you can get that information typically pretty quick. It's the mixed ones where I think that person was decent. Those are pretty tough. And you need to really find people that worked super closely with them, because otherwise it's pretty difficult to say whether or not they were able to make an impact, which again comes back to why right off the bat, it's so nice to just have people that you can tap within every organization that's like an academy company or a great company and say, point me in the direction of the 3 best people. I don't want to have to go through the burden of having to try and back channel all of the maybe middle 50% or what have you.
Yeah. Most people don't have that, which is a reason to work with a recruiter. You come built in with that network.
Totally there. Yeah.
There's a couple things I want to touch on that I wasn't planning to touch on, but reference calls. You do a lot of them, I imagine. And I'm curious, do you have any tips for how to ask questions on a reference call where you actually get useful advice where it's not just, yes, I like them, they're great, hire them?
Especially on references, provided references. I've only had 2 candidates where provided references have come back negative, which that's tough. Outside of that, typically references are a standard. It is important to dig pretty deep and ask the hard questions.
It's hard questions.
Yeah. Why would I not hire this person? What are their biggest weaknesses? And then if they give you the typical, oh, they work too hard, it's like, no. Tell me more. What are their actual weaknesses? What are things that we should be really cognizant of? Would you hire this person again? Would you report to this person? Would you endorse this person if you knew that your name was attached to it? Things like that, I think, get people thinking. And even if you just sense the slightest pause, that in itself will be enough to kind of make you think twice, right? So it's a lot of reading the room and probing harder than you think necessary, which is tough. But Back channel references, I think, will always provide a greater source of truth than provided. It's similar to like an Instagram reel as opposed to the photos you're tagged in. That's the way I think of it. It's like, this is what you want the world to see or think of you as. And then these are what your peers and your direct reports and the people around you actually say about the work that you did during this time.
Awesome. Coming back to a point you made about recruiter training 101, you learn how to find patterns and red flags in people's resume. What else is a red flag in your resume that you want to avoid? There's a rule of thumb of like, if you're at a place for less than a year, it's bad. Is that true? How do you feel about that? How do hiring managers generally feel about that?
It definitely depends with regards to being at a place less than a year. If that's a recurring theme, of course, that's a big red flag. Even if it's happened 2 or 3 times. 3, definitely. If it's happened twice, it's like, that feels off. You got to let people tell their story though, and their side of things. And again, it comes back to like reaching out to different people and understanding if what they're saying is true was actually the truth. And so when you have a really good pulse on what's happening in tech and whether there was a riff and the reason that person was let go was actually for, because they weren't prioritizing a certain part of the product or whatever, like those things, it happens. That's life, especially right now, right? If we were to X every single person that has a short stint that joined a new company over the course of the past year, like that wouldn't do anyone any good. Another thing I've found that's pretty interesting is that people will often, because they're so afraid of that narrative, they'll often not include on their resume companies that they didn't stay for a year. And in my personal opinion, that's actually almost more of a red flag because that did happen. And you don't want to just pretend like that wasn't a decision you made in your life. And usually, if handled with grace, you can speak to the reason that you decided to make a bet, the reason that you went there, and the reason that you moved on in a way that people can typically resonate with. But I've seen executives just put that they've simply been advising for 2 years or something like that, when in reality they had 2 companies that failed. And the fact of the matter is, I have some CFO candidates I'm talking to right now, and their past 3 years have been short stints because they were brought in to take a company through an IPO, and then that changed, or they were brought in to enter into a SPAC, and then that became less of the buzz, right? So like these things happen and roles change. And I think it's just allowing people to tell their story is the most important thing. So I would say red flag is, for me, just always be honest about like when you started, when you left a company. If I see that someone still has present on their LinkedIn, but they've been gone for 2 years and they kind of are acting like they're still there, that doesn't feel good. You just want people to give you the truth, the straight facts, so that you can support them and tell their story and represent them in a way that makes you feel like you have all the details.
Got it. So basically, don't lie. That makes sense. That reminds me a little bit of people kind of upgrade their titles a little bit because maybe they don't have an official title or they just want to sound a little important. How do you feel about when people do that on their resumes?
Yeah, I don't love that. I also don't love on the resume when people, and some people do this and it's okay, but when people say like silly, vague names, like they'll say something along the lines of whatever at Reddit, like as their title, or master of blank at this. And it's like, okay, what were you actually doing?
But I think they do that to avoid recruiters reaching out to them.
Exactly. As their direct target, I'm pissed. So I feel directly attacked in that regard. So that's something that throws me off, but that could definitely be a personal thing. And I think overall, like for the most part, people don't have any other things that really just throw me for a loop. And the fact of the matter is, resumes we look at less and less, especially at the executive level. And it's a lot more of allowing people to tell their story, meeting in person, talking with their different people that support them, and getting kind of more of the big picture around who they are.
I want to talk about what recruiters often do wrong and what you've learned there. But before we get there, one last question. Do you have any tips for a product manager in the interviewing process? How to be more successful interviewing?
I've had this come up a few times when I've interviewed product folks, that they'll speak down on their counterparts or say that, the reason they weren't able to meet deadlines or push product in the right way was because of the engineering team or because of other components of the business, and it wasn't them. And so I think that's never a good way to go about it. So, it seems obvious, but you would be surprised how not obvious it is. So, thinking about things more holistically, speaking honestly about your strengths and things that you want to continue to grow and improve upon, and then being able to tell your story, like practice telling your story. So often people don't do that, especially when they're not looking for jobs. And then it's not until their 10th interview that they know how to tell their story and what they did and what they impacted and why they were someone to be missed when they moved on. Those are things that you want to know how to speak to. And unless it's something you've been doing or practicing, it's less natural. That's some advice, I think, just off the top of the head.
Awesome. That's really good advice. One thing that makes me think about, I know I want to get to this last section, but do you think the best product leaders have their kind of story figured out in the future and work backwards from that and have a sense of where they want to end up, or just kind of take it as it goes? Because I'm the latter. I had no plan. I just went to follow the path that was presented. Do you think that is generally true for folks that end up being successful? Or do you recommend people think about, here's where I want to be in 5 years. Here's what I need to do to get there. Do you have any guidance there?
I mean, for what it's worth, I'm definitely more with you. I don't know where I want to be in 5 years, so it's tough for me to say. But I do think that typically someone that has the end goal of being a CEO will put the pieces into place to try and get there. And so it's not a bad idea if you do have an end goal of wanting to run your own thing to inch towards that. So maybe you go from being a product specific leader to then operating in some type of GM of a business unit capacity and owning a P&L. And then although it's more of a product oriented role, you're still getting closer and closer to that end goal of COO or CEO. So if it's something like that, then I think that naturally makes sense. Do you think people can be enticed by shiny objects? So excited because it's a step up from a title perspective and things like that. And I think that's just so not important in the grand scheme of things. You could be the VP of product or CPO of what? So that's so vague. Like if someone just says, I want to be a chief product officer, that's the end goal. I always say, of what? Like you could be the chief product officer of your household. Is it of a multi-billion-dollar consumer brand? So I guess what I'm trying to say is work backwards from a goal for sure, but don't allow titles or valuation bubbles or other things to derail something that feels good. If you're in a role and you feel like you're making impact and you're learning and you're growing and are excited about the work you're doing, do not allow a title of some other company to make you feel like what you're doing isn't worthwhile.
I love that advice. So many people just chase some fancy new role, new title, new logo, and end up getting there like, man, this sucks.
Exactly. Yeah.
This reminds me, I did a meditation retreat once, and one of the teachings there was you don't want to be fixated with achieving a specific thing, but you want to push your cart in that direction. Just like head that direction and have a general sense, but not, I need to be that thing, and that's what'll make me happy.
Exactly. I think that's exactly right.
Awesome. Okay. Final topic is from the recruiter perspective. What do you find recruiters do wrong most often or miss when they're trying to attract great product talent to a company?
Yeah. So this is one I feel especially passionate about because I do think recruiters have a bit of a reputation. And I think that it's for some good reason. There's naturally people that forget that these are human beings that we're dealing with every single day that have lives, have families, have careers or ambitions outside of their career. So I think it's essential that you remember that this is another human being on the other end of things and that you should treat them with the same level of respect that you would expect to be treated. This has become even more apparent now that I have gone through some of my own recruiting cycles where I was looking for different jobs, and a transactional recruiting call just will rub you so the wrong way and will make you want to put things on your resume, like I just alluded to, that say things like whatever at Reddit or what have you, because you just don't want to deal with it. And so I think you have to be a human. You have to start with a relationship, find common ground, build rapport, listen to people, like actually listen and remember what they say. So if someone says, I never want to do a crypto company, and I just am only shoving crypto companies down their throat, that's just insanely tone deaf. Or if they say, I have this vest that I really want to be around for in May of next year, and I just keep hitting them up prior to that, that's just so not receptive to what they just said. Things like that. Make notes if easier, because we speak to so many people all day long. So it's definitely not easy to do. But I'll have a note on my calendar that John Kim's vest just happened in March. And then I'll be like, oh, okay, might be a good time for me to catch up. I won't say, congrats on the recent vest. I'll say, you want to grab a coffee, or do you want to catch up about this? Or, hey, I saw that you were speaking at this conference. Love what you spoke about with regards to this. You got to find ways to connect with people outside of just shoving them into a job. And so I would say something that I've learned and become very good at is starting with a foundation of relationship building, gaining trust from people, because once you have that, then people will hear you out on jobs and people will listen to you and actually trust your advice from a career direction and perspective. But that takes time to build that. And it's definitely not going to be built by just chucking things at the wall and seeing what sticks with people and seeing where you can shove them temporarily. In fact, that will make them lose trust. And once you lose trust in a candidate, it's impossible to get it back.
It's interesting how one of the recurring themes of our chat so far is just play the long game in every way, which takes more time. Kind of sucks that you have to put in all this time ahead of time before you really need to get something done. But what you keep coming back to is just that's how you end up being successful as a recruiter, as a product leader, as a hiring manager, as a founder.
1,000,000%. Yeah. Yeah. And it's really easy when you've got a quota to hit and you've got, people to provide for and a mortgage to just think about the numbers. But you have to play the long game because people aren't just a commodity. It's so much more.
And one of the perks of working with recruiters, they have done that already for you. And so I was going to ask, when does it make sense for a founder to engage with a recruiter like yourself? And when should they not?
Engaging with recruiters sooner rather than later in a proactive way is always a positive thing. It's just sometimes companies aren't at the stage where they can necessarily hire a full-time recruiter because of resources and how expensive it is to bring in an exec recruiter. So, having someone that you can bounce things off of in a more informal capacity, bringing in someone like a talent advisor that can help in a consultative way, those types of things, 1,000,000%. Leaning into the venture firms that have backed you, which is a lot of what I'm doing right now, that is definitely areas in which early CEO founders should be leaning into that and trying to get as knowledgeable as possible. And then I would say typically Series B feels, Series A dependent on the check size, and then Series B feels like a good time to bring in a couple key big players if the company's well positioned to do so.
And bring in meaning full-time in-house recruiters or a firm?
Probably bring in a firm. Yeah, that would be my recommendation. I think you can bring in one or two recruiters in the early days, like seed, if it makes sense for the company and they're growing quickly, but it's all kind of case to case.
The fact that you're kind of off the table for most founders, and that you're at GC, which is a perk, and is that true? Like you basically at this point work for General Catalyst founders, is that correct?
I am supporting all of our GC founders in the consumer and crypto portfolio. That being said, I spend all day, every single day, networking and chatting with amazing entrepreneurs, people that could be founding a company down the road and need some advice, great people that want to help in an advising capacity. So it is, I would say, 50% networking, 50% actual parachuting into portfolio.
Got it. Okay. That's cool. I didn't know that part.
Yeah.
So outside of that, what do you suggest founders look for when they're looking for a recruiter? And this second to last question, what are signs that this is a good firm and good recruiter? Just what should you be looking for when you're looking to hire a recruiter, either in-house or a firm?
I think it's important to provide them with some direction and then see if they can recite it back to you. Tell them the types of things you're looking for and then say, did that resonate? Because I'd love to hear from you what you took away from that and what you think we should be looking for. And then kind of off the bat, ask them for a couple candidate ideas. Don't give them time to just go call other people. In real time, ask them for some candidate ideas. Where does their brain go? Who are people they would call tomorrow on this? The more that you can get that dynamic relationship formed before you even go to search, the more you can determine whether this is someone you want to calibrate with. So yeah, I think just putting them on the spot a little bit and asking them to show their work rather than just sending over a deck of searches that could have been done by other partners or could have just been done by other people on their team. You want to actually understand who this person is. So that first question is testing their listening skills and their ability to actually hear what you're saying and what you're looking for. And then the second is, okay, now how quickly can we get calibrated on what this profile should look like?
Awesome. That is great advice. Very tactical. Any final words of wisdom before we get to our very exciting lightning round?
This has been awesome, by the way. I think more generally, the advice is just treat people like human beings, build rapport, play the long game, and gain trust. And that takes time. And so those are the most important things from a recruiting standpoint is being able to tap people and have them feel like you genuinely have their best interest at heart and that you care about their career and life outside their career. And so I think that's what makes for a really good recruiter.
Simple advice, but often forgotten and easy to overlook. Awesome. All right. Yeah. We've reached our very exciting lightning round. I'm going to give you 6 questions. Whatever comes to mind, we'll go through them real fast. Does that sound good?
Okay. Yes.
Let's do it. What are 2 or 3 books that you recommend most to other people?
The Power of Now and You Are Here.
Wow. Awesome. What are favorite other podcasts that you listen to other than this one?
I mean, there's tech ones, but Your Own Backyard, because I went to Cal Poly. So that one hits a little close to home.
Wow, haven't heard of that. Cool. What's a recent movie or TV show that you've watched that you've enjoyed?
Top Gun. I've watched too many times. And
the new Top Gun.
Yeah. And then TV show. Oh, it's all trash reality. So I just can't tell you.
I get that. I understand. My wife has that. She can't tell anyone. Yeah.
That's my one secret.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, great. We'll move on, but that's great. What's a favorite? Oh, that's interesting. What's a favorite interview question that you like to ask, or maybe you've seen someone ask?
I love the good strengths and weaknesses question. I think it's really good to see how people self-analyze themselves.
What do you look for in their answer? That's the sign that it's well answered.
Honesty, authenticity, can read right through a work too hard answer or a perfectionist type answer. What are your weaknesses? Let's talk about it.
For real.
So that one I think is always a really good test of character.
What are some favorite apps right now?
I've been playing around on BeReal. I mean, I love Spotify, straightforward. And then I've been on Strava. I've been running. So those are
That's a good combination of apps. That's like a full life.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Trying to be.
Final question. Who else in the industry would you say that you most respect as a leader, a thought leader, influence type person?
My first boss out of college, Joe Suleiman, is awesome. He's always taught me to lead with that relationship-based approach. And it's really so easy to say that you do that, but then to actually do it and live it out for the people that work for you, as well as the people that are in industry and speak of you is something else. And so he's always taught me to do that. And I just learned a ton from him. And he's just incredibly smart and in tune with what's happening in industry and makes great stances and opinions on how to navigate those types of things. So he's someone that I have an immense amount of respect for.
Sounds like an amazing person. Lauren, this was excellent. I feel like this is going to be useful to so many people, product managers, founders, other recruiters, all kinds of other people. Thank you so much for doing this and making the time. 2 final questions. Where can folks find you online if they want to reach out or maybe collaborate with you and learn more? And how can listeners be useful to you?
Yes, absolutely. And also thank you. This has been so much fun. They can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I happen to be on that one quite a bit. So definitely can DM me there, can send me an email, and I can shoot you that over as well. And then the way they can be helpful is if there's people that they think the world of, shoot them my way. If they have questions around, best ways to go through an interview process or how to navigate different things, please, by all means, like a huge part of my job is trying to help people that are going through this for the first time. Happy to just be a sounding board or help in any capacity.
So if you're an awesome product leader, you want to see what's out there, find Lauren on LinkedIn. Is that the best place to find you?
That's perfect.
Awesome.
Yep.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find the podcast. You can find all past episodes or learn more about the show at lennyspodcast.com. See you in the next episode.